The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
And welcome back to our Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading From Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green, the subtitle Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storming of the Presidency. This is from the afterword, the very last chapter. It's titled Kali Yuga, which in Hinduism is when the earth goes into a phase of destruction. In the shell-shocked aftermath of the election, President Obama, looking shaken, appeared in the White House Rose Garden to deliver public remarks intended to project a sense of calm, a sense, really, that the basic stability of our country remained intact. Sun is up, Obama said. I know everybody had a long night. I did as well. Had a chance to talk to President-elect Trump last night about 3:30 in the morning, I think it was, to congratulate him on winning the election. End of quote. The next day, when the two men appeared together in the Oval Office, it felt as if the world had slipped through the looking glass. Trump quickly named Bannon his chief White House strategist. Republicans controlled every branch of government. With Trump's ability to defy every political norm, anything seemed possible. Who could argue otherwise after what had just transpired? And yet, within days of his inauguration, Trump's White House was plunged into chaos and scandal from which it has not recovered and may never. Bannon, the imaginative reconceiver of U.S. politics, hung streams of paper listing Trump's promises from the walls of his West Wing office. His strategy, as always, was to launch furious attacks, this time to, quote, shock the system, end quote, and rapidly reorient the federal government in a more nationalist direction. He called this, with what I took to be intentional irony, a shock and awe approach to asserting Trump's power. But Trump's flurry of activity quickly ran into problems. There was his executive order, sprung a week after his inauguration, banning immigrants from 7 majority Muslim countries, which set off nationwide protests and was blocked by the courts. His firing 2 weeks later of National Security Director Michael Flynn for contacts with the Russians. The collapse of his first major legislative initiative, a bill to repeal Obamacare. His firing of FBI Director James Comey. And the swift descent of the West Wing into a viper's nest of backstabbing and leaks. This quick turn toward a crack-up was hardly unforeseeable or even altogether surprising, but it contrasted sharply with the success of a candidate who had dominated his opponents, shaped news coverage, and shown himself to be all but impervious to the forces that overwhelm other politicians. Bannon, whose wild gambits in the campaign had invariably paid off, seemed to run out of magic tricks when Hillary Clinton was no longer a target. The government wasn't as malleable to Trump and Bannon's aggressions as the Republican Party and the cable news channels had been, and they found themselves consistently thwarted and undermined by the courts, by right-wing hardliners in Congress, by their own inexperience and Trump's errant tweets, and by the bureaucracy they were now overseeing. The crises these failures precipitated in the White House cost Bannon much of his influence and soon threatened Trump's presidency. While it's still early in his term, the possibilities that Trump Trump's most ardent supporters once imagined for his presidency already seem to be mostly foreclosed. I think there are three main reasons why Trump's administration has so quickly fallen into disorder and confusion. Number one, Trump thought being president was about asserting dominance. Just after he'd locked up the GOP nominations, Trump said something to me that crystallized his view of politics and explains, to my mind, much of his subsequent difficulties. Quote, I deal with people that are very extraordinarily talented people, he told me. I deal with Steve Wynn. I deal with Carl Icahn. I deal with killers that blow these politicians away. It's not even the same category. This, he meant politics, this is a category that's like 19 levels lower. You understand what I'm saying? Brilliant killers. Trump was equating politics with business and the presidency with the job of being a big shot CEO, a killer. He filled the upper ranks of his administration with people of a similar mindset. Gary Cohn, Wilbur Ross, Steve Bannon, aggressive, domineering men accustomed to getting their way by dint of their position. None had government experience, nor did many others in the West Wing. So none anticipated the problems this approach to governing would cause. Trump's self-conception as the all-powerful apprentice boss blinded him to a fundamental truth of the modern presidency, that the president needs Congress more than the Congress needs the president. Trump's domineering instinct served him poorly, since most members of Congress are secure in their jobs and accountable mainly to their own constituents. And it backfired disastrously when Trump fired Comey after he refused to submit to a pledge of loyalty to his boss. Number two, Trump ran against the Republican Party, Wall Street, and Paul Ryan, but then took up their agenda. Populists often struggle to govern, but Trump scarcely attempted to lead the populist revolution that he promised. In May, he told me he would transform the Republican Party into a workers' party. But while he kept voicing populist shibboleths, the legislative agenda he took up was the standard conservative fare pushed by Paul Ryan. During the GOP primary, Trump has shrewdly sensed its weak point, Ryan's desire to finance tax cuts for the rich by cutting programs like Social Security and Medicaid, harmed the party's white blue-collar base. Trump told me he'd made this point to Ryan directly. He said, quote, there's no way a Republican is going to beat a Democrat when the Republican is saying we're going to cut your Social Security, and the Democrat is saying we're going to keep it and give you more. The book is Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storm of the Presidency.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Well, I was going to start going off on the Walmart shooter. It turns out the Walmart shooter of last week was, the guy walked into a Walmart and shot it up. And he had been living with a bunch of Bibles and no furniture. But now we've got another guy. We got 26 people dead, and down in Sutherland, Texas. We have now reached the point where more people have died in mass shootings in 1 year in 2017 than in any other year. A trend that began back in the 1980s and has just burst through. That is showing the world the fundamental mental illness associated with an industry, in this case the weapons industry, owning an entire political party. So that people can buy, weapons that have nothing to do with sports shooting, have nothing to do with hunting, have nothing to do with tradition or taking your kids out in the woods or any of that, assault weapons. This is crazy. Chris Murphy spoke out this morning. Actually, it was yesterday afternoon. He said, the paralysis you feel right now, the impotent helplessness that washes over you as news of another mass slaughter scrolls across this television screen, isn't real. It's a fiction created and methodically cultivated by the gun lobby, designed to assure that no laws are passed to make America safer, because those laws would cut into their profits. As my colleagues go to sleep tonight, Senator Chris Murphy said, they need to think about whether the political support of the gun industry is worth the blood that flows endlessly onto the floors of American churches, elementary schools, movie theaters, and city streets. Ask yourself, how can you claim that you respect human life while choosing fealty to weapon makers over support for measures favored by the vast majority of your constituents? Now, there's the Colorado killer, by the way, a guy named Scott Ostrom. Oh, he was just a loner. He killed three people last Wednesday. But we're now in mass shootings, people killed in mass shootings now, with the 26 at the First Baptist Church, the 58 at the Las Vegas Strip, the 48 in the Pulse nightclub, the 14 in San Bernardino. I mean, actually San Bernardino was last year, but it all is adding up to just a genuinely terrible situation. And there are arguably multiple pieces to this. I mean, we've got the piece of there's too many guns, particularly guns that can kill a lot of people really quickly. Too many weapons of war are floating around on our streets. And at the very least, we could go back to the rational and practical position that was even supported by the Reagan administration, which is, why do we need assault weapons? You know, assault weapons are for armies and maybe for police departments in some rare situations, but not for the average person. This is crazy. And then you look at how this is playing out and what's going on with this. If you go back and look at the connection here. Stephen Paddock, the guy who shot up Vegas, had a habit of berating his girlfriend in public. Okay, this from a Quartz Media piece. Stephen Paddock shared a trait with other mass killers. He abused women. This is by Matt de Haldevang. And he just goes through the list. Who were these people? Omar Mateen, 29, the Pulse nightclub shooter. Physically abused his former wife regularly. Sengan Hui Cho, gunned down 32 people at Virginia Tech in April 2007, had been harassing women. Adam Lanza shot his mother 4 times before killing children at Sandy Hook. George Hennard stalked 2 young adult sisters and wrote them a letter in which he called women vipers a few months before he murdered 14 women and 9 men in Killeen, Texas in '91. Paddock reports the Los Angeles Times, back to Stephen Paddock, regularly demeaned his girlfriend in front of others at the local Starbucks where they were regulars. "I'm paying for your drink just like I'm paying for you," Starbucks staff recalled him saying to Mary Lou Danley. In more than half of U.S. mass shootings between 2009 and 2016, the killer, invariably male, shot a current or former intimate partner or family member. Now, there's a really important concept here of cultural shift, rapid cultural shift. We're seeing this happen right now with Harvey Weinstein. This has, just kind of exploded across the scene, and I think in part because Harvey Weinstein was a big liberal that the right-wing press, the Drudge press and whatnot, would give him the coverage that they weren't willing to give to, for example, Bill O'Reilly's sexual indiscretions or sexual crimes or whatever you may want to call it. And so there's like this moment when the press on both the left and the right are vilifying this guy, and apparently with good reason. It is causing a cultural shift. I really think in America that 10 years from now, we will look back on this year and say, that was the year when it became inappropriate for men to harass women in the workplace, basically. And worse, obviously, but just as a starting point. And, we see these major inflection points in our culture, and things shift. And, it takes a while for things to shift, but things shift. If we're seeing that revolution, that change, that shift happening with regard to sexual assault, could we be seeing it with regard to gun assault as well? Now, there's also a clear association between mass shooters and people who abuse women. So it's almost like these things are coming together. And with regard to the Weinstein thing, I wonder to what extent does Donald Trump bear some, well, I was going to say bear some guilt, maybe deserve some credit, it would be the phrase to use, for Weinstein being outed. Because it seems that we have, after all these reports of Donald Trump, assaulting and even raping some women, or the possibility of it. Trump, of course, is saying they're all liars. But I think that, especially after the Access Hollywood tape came out, a lot of Americans are saying, okay, enough. We're sick and tired of wealthy, powerful men abusing people, particularly women, who have less power and wealth. Not going to happen anymore. So how do we turn these mass shootings into something similar? Now, with women being, harassed and whatnot by men in the workplace, the way that change is happening is people coming out and saying, "Me too," saying, "Here's what happened." And I'm wondering if when we start seriously telling the stories of the victims, something that the media almost never does, the closest they got to it, I think, was Sandy Hook. And even then, it was like, oh, we have to give these people space. We have to respect their privacy. And I'm wondering how much of that meme is being promoted by the NRA. Oh, you can't talk about the victim. Yes, let's talk about the victims.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And let's stand up and say, no, never again. We don't want this to be happening like this. We'll be back. And welcome back. Dave, watching Free Speech TV in Armstrong Creek, Wisconsin. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I just want to say my heart goes out to the victims and the families and the friends of these people that were involved in this mass shooting, but it just seems like it's getting to be such a common thing. And I just want to say I've spoken to you about a lot of issues in the past, and I consider myself a very progressive person. At the same time, I've been a gun owner of my adult life. And, and I understand, as a gun owner, what these weapons were designed for, these high-capacity replicas of the military-style weapons.
Right.
They were designed to kill as many people as quickly as possible.
Yep.
Simple as that. And but I think some of the bigger issues, and you were kind of touching on this, is we have a societal problem here. It's something that, you can't really legislate morality. At the same time, it wouldn't bother me a bit if they eliminated these assault-type weapons, the production and sale tomorrow. But, realistically, that's not going to happen.
Dave, we actually do legislate morality. We've got all kinds of laws about morality. It's illegal to abuse people. It's illegal to molest people. It's illegal to steal from people. It's illegal to, you can legislate morality.
It doesn't stop people from doing it,
Yes and no. I think that a lot of people are stopped from doing inappropriate or illegal things by the very illegality of those things.
Well, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that we have to admit we have this problem, and we have to come up with, not only just one solution, because it's kind of a complex problem. And you were touching on a lot of the issues before I decided to speak today, and I agree with all you were talking about, but we have to admit we have the problem first, and figure out how we got here, in order to come up with any kind of a practical, realistic solutions. And we have to talk to each other, gun owners and non-gun owners alike. we have to be honestly address and have a good conversation about what can we do, because I don't think anybody likes to see these things happening, you know. And there, you know, we're so polarized in the issue, and this whole idea about the Second Amendment, it just, you know, it's gotten way out of hand, I think. So
I don't disagree, Dave, and I would say that the fetishizing of guns is a major problem here. But I think that the biggest problem is how our national dialogue has been shaped by the lobbying firm or group for the weapons manufacturers. You know, we don't talk about the victims, for example. We do name the shooters, but you know, I don't think that we frankly vilify them enough. I mean, it's like we're fascinated by them, sort of thing. And I'm wondering if that causes other people to say, hey, if I become a shooter, I'll be famous. You know, I'll go down in a blaze of glory. I'll go out like Bonnie and Clyde. You know, it's a great thing. And you know, I'm just, you know, we have this issue of the possibility that SSRI drugs are contributing to some of this. There's you know, the larger cultural problem. There's, you know, most of these men seem to have problems with women. I mean, there's a whole bunch of issues here. And I agree with you, Dave. I think that we all need to be discussing this. Dave, thank you for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them
in standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you
24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
So let me just expand on this or develop this a little further. When one of these unhappy, tortured, angry, misogynistic, whatever, gun-owning nut jobs, and sometimes they don't even own guns, they just go out and buy them specifically for this purpose. When one of these guys, and they're always guys, starts thinking about committing mass murder, what do you think is going through their head? Do you think it's like some Arnold Schwarzenegger fantasy? Oh yeah, I'm going to be walking along and just shooting on. Is it blaze of glory stuff? Is it that they think of themselves like that Bonnie and Clyde thing that I mentioned earlier? You know, the lovable bad guys. Do they think? How do they think of themselves? How, you know, they don't sit down and say. Nobody sits down and says, you know, I think I'll become one of the most hated people in America. Nobody does that. So what they're thinking about is how the media has treated previous shooters and how the media fails to treat the victims. The victim, there is no equivalent to the sexual assault Me Too campaign going on the gun victim side. There is no similar campaign going on right now. And I believe, putting on my talk show host hat, putting on my psychotherapist hat, putting on my just, you know, rational person hat, I believe that if our media was to focus more on the victims, if we were to tell the stories of the victims, if we were to show the pictures of the victims, that might be what is necessary to energize people to create change. And it might also cause future potential shooters, when they're thinking about going out and buying an assault weapon and killing as many people as possible, it might cause them to say, hey, wait a minute. It might give them a moment of empathy. Now, I realize probably most of these people are beyond empathy, but probably not all. So why don't we talk about the victims? I mean, we regularly talk about other victims. I mean, Trayvon Martin got shot by George Zimmerman. We were all over Trayvon. Who is he? Where does he go? What does he do? What does he look like? How is he behaving? That, et cetera. I mean, we talk about victims of crimes. And if you think of it in that context that I was mentioning before the break about what is it that produces social change, cultural change, genuine cultural change, deep down inside the culture, where the consensus changes? Well, it happened in Australia when in Tasmania in the late 90s, a crazy guy walked into a school and shot up a school. It was basically their version of Newtown. And the Australians and the Tasmanians were so horrified by this, they said, okay, that's it, screw it. We're gonna do a gun buyback, and we're gonna make it really difficult to own a gun unless you genuinely are a rancher or a hunter or a sports shooter, and you can document that. And you know how to use your weapon, and you know how to keep it, and you know how to, and since they did that in the late 90s, Australia has not had one single mass shooting since then. They had a bunch of them before that. So it's not like we don't know how to do this. But the Australian press, when that school in Tasmania got shot up, did talk about the victims. Families who were victims of that shooting in Australia traveled around the country and talked about it. I mean, we had the beginning of something like that with the parents, some of the parents from Newtown who were speaking out. But then Newtown got politicized. And by politicized, I'm not talking about, liberals saying, hey, you've got to, prove that you need a gun before you get. Now, by the way, there's nothing wrong with that, saying you've got to prove you need a gun, even if you have a First Amendment right to it. You have a First Amendment right to protest, to petition, to assemble in public and petition your government for redress of grievances. You have that right. It's right there in the First Amendment. And the First Amendment, presumably, at least in terms of priorities, trumps the Second Amendment. So you have the right to assemble in public, but you still need a permit. We regulate rights. We've been doing it all. You have the right to vote. It's regulated. You have, well, that's perhaps not the very best example given these days and all the voter suppression going on the Republican side. But we have these basic rights, but there's nothing that prevents them from being regulated. And the Supreme Court even said this, even in the Heller case. Congress can regulate guns. But I think it's going to take one of those moments, like the Weinstein moment, where the victims start speaking out and America starts identifying with the victims and saying, holy cow, that was terrible. And then you get a cultural change. What do you think? We'll pick up your calls after the break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls after this.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Robert Wright's brilliant new book, Why Buddhism is True, The Science and Philosophy of Meditation and Enlightenment. This is from the first chapter, which is titled Taking the Red Pill. We're on page 3. He's talking about the movie The Matrix. Remember Nemo and all that? I saw The Matrix in 1999, right after it came out, and some months later I learned I had a kind of connection to it. The movie's director, the Wachowski siblings, had given Keanu Reeves 3 books to read in preparation for playing Neo. One of them was a book I had written a few years ago, earlier, The Moral Animal, Evolutionary Psychology and Everyday Life. I'm not sure what kind of link the directors saw between my book and The Matrix, but I know what kind of link I see. Evolutionary psychiatry can be described in various ways, and here's one way I had described it in my book. It is the study of how the human brain was designed by natural selection to mislead us and even enslave us. Don't get me wrong, natural selection has its virtues, and I'd rather be created by it than not be created at all, which, so far as I can tell, are the only 2 options this universe offers. Being a product of evolution is by no means entirely a story of enslavement and delusion. Our evolved brains empower us in many ways, and they often bless us with a basically accurate view of reality. Still, ultimately, natural selection cares about only one thing, or I should say, cares in quotes about only one thing, since natural selection is just a blind process, not a conscious designer. And that one thing is getting genes into the next generation. Genetically based traits that in the past contributed to genetic proliferation have flourished, while traits that haven't have fallen by the wayside. And the traits that have survived this test include mental traits, structures and algorithms that are built into the brain and shape our everyday experience. So if you ask the question, what kinds of perceptions and thoughts and feelings guide us through life every day? The answer at the most basic level is not the kinds of thoughts and feelings and perceptions that give us an accurate picture of reality. No, at the most basic level, the answer is the kinds of thoughts and feelings and perceptions that helped our ancestors get genes into the next generation. Whether those thoughts and feelings and perceptions give us a true view of reality is, strictly speaking, beside the point. As a result, they sometimes don't. Our brains are designed to, among other things, delude us. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Some of my happiest moments have come from delusion, believing, for example, that the tooth fairy would pay me a visit after I lost a tooth. But delusion can also produce bad moments, and I don't just mean moments that, in retrospect, are obviously delusional, like horrible nightmares. I also mean moments that you might not think of as delusional, such as lying awake at night with anxiety, or feeling hopeless, even depressed for days on end, or feeling bursts of hatred toward people, bursts that may actually feel good for a moment, but slowly corrode your character, or feeling bursts of hatred toward yourself, or feeling greedy, feeling a compulsion to buy things or eat things or drink things well beyond the point where your well-being is served. Though these feelings, anxiety, despair, hatred, greed, aren't delusional the way a nightmare is delusional, if you examine them closely, you'll see that they have elements of delusion, elements you'd be better off without. And if you think you would be better off, imagine how the whole world would be. After all, feelings like despair and hatred and greed can foster wars and atrocities. So if what I'm saying is true, if these basic sources of human suffering and human cruelty are indeed in large part the product of delusion, there is value in exposing this delusion to the light. Sounds logical, right? There's a problem that I started to appreciate shortly after I wrote my book on evolutionary psychology. The exact value of exposing a delusion to the light depends on what kind of light you're talking about. Sometimes understanding the ultimate source of your suffering doesn't by itself help very much. Let's take a simple but fundamental example, eating some junk food, feeling briefly satisfied, and then only minutes later feeling a kind of crash and maybe a hunger for more junk food. This is a good example to start with for 2 reasons. First, it illustrates how subtle our delusions can be. There's no point in the course of eating a 6-pack of small powdered sugar donuts when you're believing that you're the Messiah or that foreign agents are conspiring to assassinate you. And that's true of many sources of delusions that I'll discuss in this book. They're more about illusion, about things not being quite what they seem, than about delusion in the more dramatic sense of the word. Still, by the end of the book, I'll have argued that all of these illusions do add up to a very large-scale warping of reality, a disorientation that is as significant and consequential as out-and-out delusion. The second reason junk food is a good example to start is that it's fundamental to the Buddha's teachings. Okay, it can't be literally fundamental to the Buddha's teachings, because 2,500 years ago when the Buddha taught, junk food as we know it didn't exist. What's fundamental to the Buddha's teachings, though, is the general dynamic of being powerfully drawn to sensory pleasure that winds up fleeting at best. One of the Buddha's main messages is that the pleasures we seek evaporate quickly and leave us thirsting for more. We spend our time looking for the next gratifying thing, the next powdered sugar donut, the next sexual encounter, the next status-enhancing promotion, the next online purchase. But the thrill always fades, and it always leaves us wanting more. The old Rolling Stone lyric, "I can't get no satisfaction," is, according to Buddhism, the human condition. Indeed, the Buddha is famous for asserting that life is pervaded by suffering. Some scholars say that's an incomplete rendering of his message, and that the word translated as suffering, dukkha, could, for some purposes, be translated as unsatisfactoriness. The book is Why Buddhism is True, The Science and Philosophy of Meditation and Enlightenment. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. The idea that we should begin talking about the victims of gun violence has been done before with some considerable success by the forced pregnancy anti-abortion movement, carrying around pictures of gory, bloody pictures of aborted fetuses. This is not a new strategy. And, frankly, I think that if our media, because that's where it's going to have to begin, right? The news agencies that actually have employees who call themselves reporters, who are on the ground and doing this kind of work, they're going to have to go out and find these families and get their permission and publicize their stories. And there's going to have to be a broad consensus across the media that, for the last 30, 40 years, we've never talked about the victims of gun violence because we didn't want to, quote, invade their privacy, end quote. Well, a lot of those victims are quite happy to share their stories with us. Some obviously not. But many of them more than enthusiastic to do so. Tulsi Gabbard, Gabby Gifford, a great example. And her husband, Steve Wilson, I think his name. But in any case, her husband, and she putting together this organization and speaking out about gun violence. It needs to go way beyond that. We need to see a lot of these victims. Dion in Round Lake, Illinois. Hey, Dion, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, what's on my mind is probably two issues here. Is that we not only have a right to bear arms, but we also have a right to universal health care. And then the other thing is that I believe that we're also in a national mental health crisis. I was a victim of child abuse, and then that can mess you up until adolescence. Your brain is hardwired, and that's what I think happened to the shooter here, which led to the domestic abuse of his wife. What do you think?
I don't know. I think that anytime we try to say, here's why this person did that, we walk into very, very dangerous territory. The question, though, that we have to ask ourselves, Dion, is what is unique about the United States? Because, in terms of having a bunch of angry white men around or a bunch of white guys who have been screwed by the system, there's actually probably more people who meet that definition in Europe than there is here in North America. And particularly with the crisis that in Greece, in Spain, in Portugal, in Italy, I mean, you've got countries where you've got, unemployment rates that are pushing 25%. It's some real serious problems. And they're not turning into mass shooters. In fact, they're not even turning into mass killers. I mean, they're not killing people with cars, and they're not killing people with, swords and things. They're just not killing people. So what is different about the United States? What is different about our culture? And I would say...
We're a violent country, a nation built on violence and genocide of Indians.
Yeah, I would say that
the Iceman killer, Tom?
Yeah, we have always celebrated genocide. The old cowboy and Indian movies that I grew up with as a kid in the 50s and 60s. This is absolutely, Dion, absolutely. We are a country that was birthed in genocide, and we haven't done what Germany did. We haven't gone through a national collective, oh my God, we haven't been through a process of reconciliation like South Africa did. We need to do those things. Dion, thank you for the call. Ron in Land of Lakes, Florida. Hey, Ron, what's on your mind today?
Hey, thank you for taking my call, Tom. And you're absolutely right with everything you're saying. Psychologically, if you go back to the Reagan era, we had mental institutions all over this country to help curb and stop this thing from getting out of hand. But then when you have the leader of this country saying that he could go on Fifth Avenue and shoot a person and not lose a vote, these other people figure, well, hey, if he can do this, that, and the other, I'm pissed off and I'm upset, I'm just going to go do what I feel is going to make me feel good. But, it only takes a couple of seconds to do something that you feel sorry about for the rest of your life.
You're absolutely right.
We aren't seeing that. And like you said, we're not dealing with the victims and what they and their families have to go through.
See, just like I think that Trump saying that he can grab women by the crotch and blowing off the women who have accused him of sexual assault, in my opinion, has so upset many people in the United States, women and men, but women in particular, that I think many are saying, to hell with all these, the fear of retribution and all of the things that might have restrained us in the past. It's now important to lay out what's going on. What is happening right now in America, and we haven't done that with guns. We've done that with a bunch of different things. Yeah, Ron, well said. Thank you very much for the call. Guy in Falls City, Washington. Hey, Guy, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, I was just you were talking about cultural change. In 80 years, I've watched the cultural change, and it started with the media back in the days of Ronald Reagan, when demonizing people, poor people like welfare queens, and they just did away with the FCC. They just rattled the FCC, where now corporations control 80% of the media. Since when is the liberals backing the corporations?
Yeah.
It's a joke when I hear a Republican say the liberal media.
Well, it's also, Guy, you point out the change in television programming in the 80s. Not only was there a change in what they were decrying, what they were complaining about, but there was a change in who they were praising. Remember Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, Dynasty? There were a couple of other Dynasty-like movies. I mean, all of a sudden in the 80s, in the 70s and the 60s and 50s, television had been about average people, right? Lucy and Ricky lived in a normal apartment in New York City. Jackie Gleason lived in a fourth-floor walk-up apartment, a cold water apartment, cheap housing, right, in New York City. And he and his friend Art Carney, the character that Art played, they both were union workers. One worked in the sewer, the other drove a bus. I mean, we used to have, Laura and Rob Petrie. We used to have average American, essentially role models on television. And then during the Reagan era, it became all about greed is good and rich people are the very best there is. And that was the kickoff of the persona that we know of today as Donald Trump. That was when Trump really stepped onto the national stage as an example of conspicuous consumption, of disgusting excess that was celebrated by the Reaganistas.
Tom, what I really want to get the public and yourself to be aware that the media is using Trump as a smokescreen for what the legislation that is being passed by Congress. They're not telling the people.
Yeah, you're talking about things like the changes in ownership rules that will allow Sinclair to own TV stations that reach 70-some-odd% of the American public. Is that what you mean?
What I'm telling you about is when I talked to you before about the CRA. They have repealed labor laws, environmental laws, safety laws, Tom, the carbon,
yeah. No, Guy, there's a list in today's New York Times, I believe it is, of some 50 environmental rules and regulations that Scott Pruitt and Donald Trump are doing away with. And these are things that, keep us safe. They protect us from poisons. They protect us from a poisoned workplace and poison in our food. And the Trumpettes are just doing away with this stuff. It's like, whatever big business and billionaires want, big business and billionaires will get from the Trump administration. It's very straightforward.
Tom, the only place that you'll get that information factually is C-SPAN. I watch it. I watch Congress. I've been on the floor every day.
Yep. No, Guy, I agree with you. C-SPAN is a great asset. Thank you for the call. Gary in Sandy, Utah. Hey, Gary, a quick one here?
Yes, good morning here. It's late morning. I just have one comment, and here's the comment. There are wacko, right-wing, and I don't know any other name to call them, who promulgate the story that Sandy Hook never happened.
Right.
But all of those grieving families who went before Congress, or not all of them, but a part of them, went before Congress, all of that never happened. The Florida massacre never happened. And I'm sure this person's going to say that that this thing that happened in Texas never happened. Well, but here's the problem. Otherwise, people that you would think would be rational believe these terrible stories, these egregious lies, this hyperbole that's made up. And an Old Testament prophet said, "Come now, let us reason together." Well, this is so unreasonable. It's incredible to say that all this grief and all staged, and all the grieving families of these massacres is all staged.
I don't think anybody's taking that seriously, Gary, but excellent point. Thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I mean, there might be a small fringe of people who take seriously what Alex Jones and those folks on that side are saying, but I don't think they're consequential. And welcome back. Johnny in Lamarck, Texas. Hey, Johnny, what's on your mind? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Tom, less than 20 minutes ago, you made a comment that our right to free speech, even though it's a right, it needs to be regulated by the fact that we need to sometimes get a police permit to assemble in public.
Right.
So what I would say, in order to guarantee that these rights remain our rights, so that they don't get subverted by police, is that we have a conversation in public often, as well as set up these conversations in grade school and high school history class and civics classes and social studies classes about what are the requirements that local police have to go through in order to establish a permit or deny a permit. That way, when you apply for a permit in public to protest, you know what the rules are. Right now, I don't think people really understand all the rules, and you can wind up being hurtled into a cyclone fence before George Bush comes down in his limousine.
Right. Well, so, Johnny, your argument is that, what, we should publish the rules?
In order, before police are allowed to issue permits on people's assembly rights, that people have a discussion nationwide and kids in school understand what cops have to do in order to deny a permit, why they would deny a permit in the first place. And that way you have the ability to go back and verify that they did their job properly and that they're not trying to play favorites, so to speak, especially if Republicans are in power.
Could be interesting. Johnny, thank you. Thanks for the suggestion. George in Coarse Gold, California. Hey, George, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Tom, I got this morning, looked at my Google News, and I got so angry because that Snopes.com is supposed to be a fact-checking website. They had a big headline, was the shooter in Texas at the church our Antifa, our left-winger, in big headline. And then you go to the story, and it's disputed, it's disproven in little tiny fine print.
Right.
And I'm so sick of that Snopes. I've just eliminated them from my sources. I think they shouldn't even be allowed to do that.
So your argument is sort of a variation on George Lakoff's "Don't think about an elephant." In order to not think about an elephant, you first have to imagine an elephant to know what it is that you're not thinking about. And you're saying that essentially by having a headline that asks the question in 72-point type or 48-point type or whatever it may be, that asks the question, was the shooter a liberal? For the majority of people who don't actually read news stories, they just read the headlines, which actually is the majority of people. They're going to just print in their brains, oh, shooter was a lefty. Is that what you're saying?
And on Snopes, it's always a lefty doing something bad.
Oh, really?
And they put that huge headline up there.
Although a lot of what Snopes is debunking is stuff that comes out of Fox so-called news and right-wing hate radio. I mean, that's where you get the vast majority of lies and factual errors that are being promoted to the American people. So maybe that's why that's what they're using.
I think it's a disservice to our knowing the truth. That's all.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, thanks a lot, George. Thanks for the call. The Snopes, the whole Snopes thing is, as I recall, it was a married couple that started this website, and it's turned into a business for them. But interesting point. That's a very good point. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Catherine in Burlington, Vermont. Hey, Catherine, what's on your mind?
Yes, hi. I wanted to make a couple of points, if I may.
Please.
You mentioned Weinstein earlier.
Mm-hmm.
My first thought with him was if he had looked like dashing Robert Redford in Robert Redford's youth, this would never have come to light. I remember this type in high school. And people would say to me, oh, the good-looking guys. Oh, Catherine, he's just a bad boy.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's an ugly guy, they would crucify him.
Yeah, it's like an extension of white privilege and an extension of male privilege is attractive privilege.
Yes.
And that's true, by the way, of all races, all genders, all everything.
Right. And my other point with guns, either we get rid of them entirely, take them off the market so people can't buy them illegally, quit manufacturing them, eliminate them, or you've got to take the good with the bad. Because this is always going to happen.
Right. But what's the good?
I was never for the Second Amendment until I went through my own crucible. And what I learned from that was you don't want a government, you want some kind of resistance, some level of resistance with a government that is armed.
Yeah. No, I've said that many, many times here, Catherine. This is one of the areas where we need to take seriously the conservative/libertarian worldview on this one issue, and that is that government has the power to destroy your right to life and your right to liberty. They can put you in, they can execute you, and they can imprison you. And those powers are extraordinary powers. And they have to be very narrowly circumscribed. They have to be controlled. They have to be regulated. Absolutely. Catherine, thank you for the call. Excellent points all. Chris in Bend, Oregon. Hey, Chris, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Welcome back to Oregon.
Thank you.
And I just want to say that no one's more disgusted by this uniquely American phenomenon of mass shooting than I am. And so, an obvious solution, if we're interested in minimizing the number of fatalities per incident, is to remove military-grade weaponry from the public, especially high-capacity magazines. Now, we know what the NRA is going to say. We know we're just waiting for them to come out and say that now is not the time to talk about gun control. And so when they do that, I'm ready for us this time to say, okay, then when? If you've got your finger on the pulse of appropriateness in terms of timing of talking about gun control, you tell us when. We'll be there.
Right.
We've been ready to talk about it for a long time, and I'm not going to listen to you just pushing it off to the side and saying now's not the time. If now is not the time, you tell us when.
Yep. I agree. And you're familiar with The Onion, America's finest news source.
Yes.
The Onion has a headline that they have run for years and years and years, apparently, for some time now. Words to the effect of another mass shooting in America, and again, the United States is not going to do anything about it. And that is this incredibly sad thing, is that we don't do anything about this. We just talk. We don't even talk about it, frankly, the way that we should.
I saw a political cartoon that a friend shared on Facebook this morning. It was a drawing of people slain in the streets, laying in pools of blood, and Uncle Sam was crouched over somebody who was still alive that had the label NRA on them, and Uncle Sam was saying, "Don't worry, everything's okay.
Yeah.
You're just fine."
Exactly. Yeah, I saw that cartoon too.
Nailed it.
Yep, I think so. Chris, thanks for the call. Well said. Lisa in San Francisco. Hey, Lisa, what's up?
Hi, Tom. You mentioned earlier, I think I heard you say something about SSRIs. Approximately 30% of this country has been prescribed either SSRIs or some sort of drug that no one mentions. When you're on them, it's fine, but when you lose your health care or your health care diminishes in some way and you don't get to continue being on them, that's where the problem lies. And a lot of people are not familiar with the problem of being off SSRIs.
Right.
I think a lot of these people are prescribed them for mental issues or depression, things like that. But what happens when they don't get their refill or they lose their health care and they go off of them? They don't understand the withdrawals associated with these. A lot of people think it's just the problem of the opioids, but nobody is aware of the extreme difficulties you have when you stop these pills.
Oh, I think these drugs are worse.
Bigger problem.
I think they're worse than opiates. I have a friend who was prescribed an SSRI to quit smoking, and who has to this day not been able to get off that drug. I have another friend who was prescribed an SSRI for hot flashes, menopause, and when she stopped taking them after about a year, and it was a very low dose, she was having what she described as giant electric shocks in her brain. I mean, it was.
I'm having those as we speak. I've been on them for 30 years. I was wrongly given them for PMS when they first came out. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
You can't get off of them, and God forbid you lose your health care. Then what? You're walking around nutso, and people aren't even aware, and this is 30% of our country. That's what's different from other countries, absolutely, is our drug laws and how the pharmaceutical company has gotten away with getting everybody hooked on them and then doesn't care when they run out.
Well, it's not just the laws, Lisa. It's also they have the ability to market, to advertise directly to consumers. There's only one other country in the world that allows that, which is New Zealand, and basically their consumer base is so small that the drug companies don't bother. But
exactly. Well, you asked what's different about our country, and I would say that is the biggest difference. And people it's just not even talked about. It's widely known, but no one in any sort of capacity to do anything about it or stop the drug companies as if we could. Unless we get universal health care and they're locked out, our doctors are going to be giving us those like candy.
Yeah, I agree.
They make so much money.
Yeah, and it's a very, very profitable business, and SSRIs are cheap to manufacture, and they just shovel them out the door at a huge profit margin. It's a $1 billion business. Lisa, thank you for the call, and I wish you the very best, withdrawing from these drugs. We will be back. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from the Thom Hartmann Reader, and this is from page 39, chapter titled An Informed and Educated Electorate. The epigraph, the quote that opens the chapter, is from Thomas Jefferson. If a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be. Whenever the people are well informed, however, they can be trusted with their own government, that whenever things get so far wrong as to attract their notice, they may be relied upon to set them right. Into the chapter. Talk radio news service based in Washington, D.C. is owned and run by my dear friend Ellen Ratner. Ellen is an experienced and accomplished journalist, and a large number of interns and young journalism school graduates get their feet wet in reporting by working for her. In March 2010, I was in Washington for a meeting with a group of senators, and I needed a studio from which to do my radio and TV show. Ellen was gracious enough to offer me hers. I arrived as three of her interns were producing a panel discussion type of TV show for web distribution at talkmedianews.com, in which they were discussing for their viewing audience their recent experiences on Capitol Hill. One intern panelist related that a White House correspondent for one of the big three TV networks had told her that the network registered a huge amount of interest in the hot story that week of a congressman's sexual indiscretions. Far less popular were stories about the debates on health care, the conflicts in the Middle East, and even the Americans who had died recently in Iraq or Afghanistan. The intern said, so that's the story they have to run with on the news, relating the substance of the network's correspondents' thoughts, because that's what the American people want to see. If the network doesn't give people what they want to see, viewers will tune away and the network won't have any viewers, ratings, or revenues. The other two interns commiserated with the first about what a shame it was that Americans wanted the titillating stories instead of the substantive ones, but they accepted without question that the network was therefore obliged to, quote, give people what they want, end quote. When they finished their panel discussion, I asked these college students if they knew that there was a time in the United States when radio and TV stations and news networks broadcast the actual news instead of infotainment because the law required them to. None of them had any idea what I was talking about. But the reality is that from the 1920s, when radio really started going big in the United States, until Reagan rolled it back in 1987, federal communications law required a certain amount of public service programming from radio and television stations as a condition of retaining their broadcast licenses. The agreement was basic and simple. In exchange for the media owners being granted a license from the Federal Communications Commission to use their airwaves, owned by the public, they had to serve the public interest first, and only then could they go about the business of making money. If they didn't do so, when it came time to renew their license, public groups and individuals could show up at public hearings on the license renewal and argue for the licenses being denied. One small way that stations lived up to their public service mandate was by airing public service announcements for local nonprofit groups, community calendars, and other charitable causes. They also had to abide by something called the Fairness Doctrine, which required them to air diverse viewpoints on controversial issues. Separately, during election campaigns, broadcasters had to abide by the equal time rule, which required them to provide equal airtime to rival candidates in any election. But the biggest way that they proved that they were providing a public service and meeting the requirements of the Fairness Doctrine was by broadcasting the news, real news, actual news, local, national, and international news produced by professional old-school journalists. Because the news didn't draw huge ratings like entertainment shows, although tens of millions of Americans did watch it every night on TV and listen to it at the top of every hour on radio from coast to coast. And because real news was expensive to produce, with bureaus and correspondents all over the world, news was a money loser for all of the big three TV networks and for most local and radio and national radio and TV stations. But it was such a sacred thing. This was, after all, the keystone that held together the station's license to broadcast and thus to do business. It didn't matter if it lost money. It made all the other money-making things possible. Through much of the early 1970s, I worked in the newsroom of a radio station in Lansing, Michigan. It had been started and was then run by three local guys, an engineer, a salesman, and a radio broadcaster. They split up the responsibilities like you expect, and all were around the building most days and would hang out from time to time with the on-air crew, all except the sales guy. I was forbidden from talking with him because I worked in news. There could be no hint, ever, anywhere, that our radio station had violated the FCC's programming in the public interest mandate by, for example, my going easy on an advertiser in a news story or promoting another advertiser in a different story. News had to be news, separate from profits and revenue. And if it wasn't, I'd be fired on the spot. News, in other words, wasn't part of the free market. It was part of our nation's intellectual commons, and thus the price of the station's license. After Reagan blew up the Fairness Doctrine in 1987, two very interesting things happened. The first was the rise of right-wing hate speech talk radio, starting with Rush Limbaugh that very year. The second, which really stepped up after President Bill Clinton signed the Telecommunications Act of '96, was that the money-losing news divisions of the big three television networks were taken under the wings of their entertainment divisions and wrung dry. Foreign bureaus were closed, reporters were fired, stories that promoted the wonders of advertisers owned by the same mega corporations began to appear, and investigative journalism began to die. It's the Thom Hartmann Reader.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us, Reverend David Billings. He is a native of Mississippi, a pastor in the United Methodist Church. He needs to turn his volume down. And a historian with social justice organizer and author of a book, Deep Denial, The Persistence of White Supremacy in History. Whoops, I just lost it. In History and Life. DeepDenialBook.com is the website. You can tweet him at UMChurch. Reverend David Billings, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thanks for joining us. I find your book fascinating, and particularly you've got to turn that volume down somehow. But in any case, I found your book fascinating, particularly the part about where you talk about growing up white in the South. Can we define terms to start out? How would you define white supremacy?
I would think that white supremacy has to do with the structures and institutions that support and affirm the lives of white people in the United States. White supremacy covers, all institutional interactions as well as economics and other types of things. But white supremacy is the rarely challenged, rarely even mentioned as a factor in this society, and yet it permeates the nation's history.
To what extent you're describing white supremacy as something that is there for white people. In other words, arguably, using the word positive in this context is very difficult, but I don't know how else to say it. You're defining it as a support system for white people, but isn't it also at the same time a destruction system or an oppression system for people of color?
Absolutely, it is, and it impacts everyone of color in this country, and certainly black and brown.
So, who are the white supremacists? To paraphrase a question the New York Times asked Henry Wallace in 1944, who are the white supremacists that we should be concerned about? Are they the people like Richard Spencer who are obvious and out there and saying it, or is it the person who lives next door who who is just constantly dropping microaggressions on people and or making hiring decisions at work that are not visible to the world at large, but are supporting the infrastructure of white supremacy?
It's all of those, but I think white supremacy really is upheld by those of us in the professions, those of us who even would decry white supremacy and say, I certainly don't agree with the Spencers of the world, but don't do anything about it. We just, decry racism and white supremacy, say we're against it, it's abhorrent, but we don't organize to do anything about it for the most part. And a lot of us, as the title of my book suggests, we're just in denial about the impact of race and white supremacy in this society. And we're encouraged to be in denial by all the institutions of society. Thus, we take no responsibility for the outcomes in this society. And those of us who are white, we're uneducated around race and white supremacy. We don't have to study it. It's always an elective. It's never a requirement.
Which is one of the principal benefits of white privilege, is it not?
Oh, yes.
White people don't have to bother with this.
And because we don't understand it, we just have an opinion on it.
Right.
And opinions, can be many and varied. And I think there's an intent to that throughout the history of this country.
So clearly we've had institutions of white supremacy in the United States, government institutions of white supremacy. We have business institutions of white supremacy. I'm thinking, redlining by the banks, for example, with real estate. Mm-hmm. But there's a million smaller examples. What are the institutions of white supremacy that in the past we have taken apart? And what are the institutions of white supremacy that in the present we need to have a discussion about taking apart?
Well, yes, the fact that none of our institutions see race as just one among many factors in this society. And when you do that, you dilute the impact of race, in my opinion. We put racism on a line with other oppressions, but this is a race-constructed nation. That's one thing. Now, currently, it's the dismissal from the black voice. I think as your previous discussion was going, it dilutes the power, say, of Black Lives Matter. It dilutes the meaning of the violence that has occurred so often in this country of late, and as just an aberration, when in fact it's yet another example of how this country and its white people, not just its majority, but it's all of us who are white. We try not to face the realities of racism, and even, as I said, deny that it exists in some quarters. But that's not just conservatives or haters or whatever language you use. It goes to the very heart of the systems and their history and why they were created that still create our realities today.
Yeah. Would you say that, for example, the attempts to limit the ability of people to vote by requiring them to produce a birth certificate or a passport in order to register to vote,
yes.
Is that an institution of white supremacy?
It is, and throughout this nation, as blacks and people of color got the right to vote, this nation would try to limit that, whether it's in the immediate aftermath of civil rights or towards the end of the 19th century and throughout the 20th century. The exercise of the right to vote, suffrage, has been fought every step of the way, still being fought today, so that efforts to limit the impact and limit the understanding of those of us who are white we don't understand the the dramatic efforts that are put towards limiting the voice of people of color.
Reverend Billings, we have just a minute left. We're talking with Reverend David Billings, the author of Deep Denial, The Persistence of White Supremacy in U.S. History and Life. What can white people do to wake up from their own denial?
I think we have to study. We're ignorant on the matter of race. We have to know that, like anything else, it has a beginning and it has impact. We have to study that. We have to join with other whites to gain clarity about what racism truly is. It's not, just or even primarily is it attitudinal or even acts of meanness. It's an arrangement. It's a structure that goes back to the very foundings of the nation. Now, a lot of us don't know that. Many of us do. The question is, what are we going, how do we act? How do we organize in our churches, in our universities, and in the larger economy? How do we organize to impact this arrangement that brushes aside, basically, the voice of people of color?
Yeah. Well, step one is calling it out, which seems like you're doing a brilliant job of. Reverend David Billings, native of Mississippi, a pastor in the United Methodist Church, historian, social justice organizer, and the author of the new book, Deep Denial, The Persistence of White Supremacy in History and Life. DeepDenialBook.com is the website. Dr. Reverend Billings, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Great speaking with you. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Steve, watching Free Speech TV in Rifle, Colorado. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hey, I'm a gun owner and a hunter, for starters. About the same age you are.
Yep.
And the way things work on these situations in southern, first you have the grieving and the hearts go out and the prayers and all that stuff. And then you have the hope they heal, the survivors heal and make it through it.
Right.
And then number three, if you're a family member, you might have to say, who pays for this? Who's paying to put my child or my loved one back together?
There are 29 GoFundMe sites for people who were injured in the Las Vegas shooting. 29.
Right. Well, that's what I'm getting at. When you're saying if you amplified the victim's problems, and really went through that, well, the best thing to do is figure out the money that they're having to pay. And all you have to do is put insurance on guns, and you're going to fix a bunch of problems.
Yeah.
I remember when I was 19 and I wanted to buy a Corvette, and I had it all figured out. I was going to buy that Corvette. My mom just happened to say, you better check with the insurance company first.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't buy that Corvette instantly, And in the briefing today, the DA said that she put out a plea for money for the victims' families. Well, there's another. You don't really hear that a lot about a car wreck. Oh, the family needs money.
Right. Generally,
there's an insurance company in there that's going to hopefully fix most of those medical bills up anyway.
Right.
And
yeah, you're coming back to my suggestion, Steve, that we treat guns the same way we treat cars, that they be registered from the time they're created until they're destroyed, number one. Number two, that people who operate them have to prove their proficiency and their knowledge of how they work, with a driver's exam, in this case a shooter's exam. And number three, that they have to have liability insurance. I think it's crazy that all those people, those 500 plus people who were injured in Las Vegas, are just SOL. They got nothing, right? And on the other hand, if they had been hit by a drunk driver, they would be getting millions of dollars from Geico.
Right.
Or, fill in the name of your insurance company.
And we piss and moan about the power of the NRA, but the average person the insurance companies are a lot stronger than the NRA. If you want to, you want to fix the NRA, put the insurance companies on them. And believe me, that's the last person the NRA wants to have to deal with.
Well, maybe. I mean, it's possible that you could flip that upside down. If you look at the AARP, the American Association for Retired Persons, the vast majority of the money that they make, and they're a very wealthy organization now, they make by selling insurance. It's health insurance, it's Medicare insurance, it's from United Healthcare. It's Medicare Advantage stuff, but that's how AARP makes their money. If the NRA was to endorse liability insurance for gun owners and was to enter into a marketing agreement with a single insurance company, the way AARP did with United Healthcare, they could make themselves a lot more money, and they could help the insurance company as well. I mean, it is possible to construct this in a way that would be a win-win, arguably, looking at it from a business point of view. But whether they're going to do that or not is pretty unlikely. Steve, but your point is really well made. Thank you for the call. And thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
Welcome back. This is fascinating. And in fact, one of the questions that I did not get to ask David Billings that I wish I had was if he sees an association between all this gun violence by white men and white supremacy. And I think that there's a clear association between the two. White supremacy, broadly speaking, arguing that any one group of people is superior to other people, suggests a worldview, a way of looking at the world, a way of looking at other people, an understanding of reality that is hierarchical. It suggests a worldview that assumes that some people are more valuable than others, some people are better than others, some people are intrinsically better than others, for lack of a better word. And when you have that kind of a worldview, it's a lot easier to kill people. I don't know how to say it other than that. I mean, this is what we indoctrinate our young men with when they join the military during a time of war. I mentioned the other day when my dad, when he was 17, and I don't know if he lied about his age or not. I mean, that's the story in the family, but it may or may not be true. But when Dad was 17, he went off and joined the Army to fight in World War II. And the war ended while he was in basic training, and he ended up as part of the occupation of Japan. But he had been through that process as a young man and as a teenager. I mean, from the time he was 12 until he was 17, the U.S. was in a war with Japan and Germany. And so we were indoctrinated, essentially, in the United States, racially. I mean, you look at the cartoons from that era, the old Warner Brothers cartoons, the Daffy Duck cartoons and things. They would have these caricatures of Japanese figures with giant buck teeth and heavy, big, thick, bottle cap glasses, and all this kind of stuff. It was racism that was being used to tell us that the German and the Japanese are different from us, and so if we bomb one of their cities, if we firebomb Tokyo or Dresden, and we did both, and we kill thousands, tens of thousands of absolutely innocent civilians, and we did, it doesn't matter. So we have used this, we as a country, and it's not just us, it's not just the United States, every society on earth does this. During the Vietnam War, there was all these slurs for Asian people that were very popular, shall we say, in certain circles. Just like during World War II, my dad used, as I said the other day, my dad used to refer to Japanese as Japs and Germans as Krauts. I mean, that was what he learned as a kid. He learned that kind of essentially racism. So similarly, if you grow up white with all of the entitlements, all of the goodies, all of the benefits that whiteness confers, I would argue that it is more possible, I'm constructing bad sentences here, but that it's easier to step from that worldview, I'm white and therefore I'm superior, to step from that to a person saying that they can do anything they want, that they can take other people's lives. It's this hyper entitlement. And there is something about being white and also about being white and male that factors into this. One of the realities in psychology is that the more privileged a person is, the wealthier they are, the more bulletproof they are culturally, societally, whatever. The more privileged a person is, the less compassionate they are. Now, when this was first observed 20, 30, 40 years ago, it was assumed that it might be correlation without causation, right? It might just be or there might be a causative thing. It may be that people who are more privileged are, in order to use that privilege, they have to feel less compassion. But it turns out, the research that's been done in the last few decades suggests that it works the other way around, that people who are not privileged, which would be people of color and to some extent even white women in this society, women broadly, people who are not privileged the way that white men are, have to continually be monitoring people around them because those people could represent a threat, particularly white people. And part of that monitoring the world around you requires identifying with those people so that you can project, you can predict how they're going to behave relative to you, which is called compassion. So women and people of color, as a survival skill, learn compassion. White men don't have to. And I would submit to you, and I realize that I'm way out here on the very thin edge of the speculative ice, right? But I would submit to you that that is one of the big factors that explains why virtually every mass shooting in America has been done by a white man. Let's talk about it. We'll take your calls after the break here. Stick around. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour on the Thom Hartmann Program. A lot of deep concepts here to ponder.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And of course, the biggest issue, if we have correctly identified some of the major issues that are leading to these problems, what do we do about it?
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from Arundhati Roy's brilliant book, Capitalism, A Ghost Story. This is from the afterword, at the very end of the book. Yesterday morning, the police cleared Zuccotti Park, but today the people are back. The police should know that this protest is not a battle for territory. We're not fighting for the right to occupy a park here or there. We're fighting for justice. Justice is not just for the people of the United States, but for everybody. What you've achieved since September 17th, when the Occupy movement began in the United States, is to introduce a new imagination, a new political language into the heart of the empire. You've reintroduced the right to dream into a system that tried to turn everybody into zombies, mesmerized into equating mindless consumerism with happiness and fulfillment. As a writer, let me tell you, this is an immense achievement. I cannot thank you enough. We are talking about justice. Today, as we speak, the Army of the United States is waging a war of occupation in Iraq and Afghanistan. U.S. drones are killing civilians in Pakistan and beyond. Tens of thousands of U.S. troops and death squads are moving into Africa. If spending trillions of dollars of your money to administer occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan is not enough, a war against Iran is being talked up. Ever since the Great Depression, the manufacture of weapons and the export of war have been key ways in which the United States has stimulated its economy. Just recently, under President Obama, the United States made a $60 billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia. It hopes to sell thousands of bunker busters to the United Arab Emirates. It has sold $5 billion worth of military aircraft to my country, India, my country, which has more poor people than all the poorest countries of Africa put together. All these wars, from the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to Vietnam, Korea, Latin America, have claimed millions of lives. All of them fought to secure the, quote, American way of life, end quote. Today we know that the American way of life, the model that the rest of the world is meant to aspire toward, has resulted in 400 people owning the wealth of half the population of the United States. It has meant thousands of people being turned out of their homes and jobs while the U.S. government bailed out banks and corporations. American International Group alone was given $182 billion in the bailout. The Indian government worships U.S. economic policy. As a result of 20 years of the free market economy, today 100 of India's richest people own assets equal to 1/4 of the country's GDP, while more than 80% of Indian people live on less than 50 cents a day. 250,000 farmers driven into a spiral of death have committed suicide. We call this progress and now think of ourselves as a superpower. Like you, we are well qualified, we have nuclear bombs and obscene inequality. The good news is that people have had enough and are just not going to take it anymore. The Occupy movement has joined thousands of other resistance movements all over the world in which the poorest of people are standing up and stopping the richest corporations in their tracks. Few of us dreamed that we would see it, the people of the United States on our side, trying to do this in the heart of empire. I don't know how to communicate the enormity of what this means. The 1% say we don't have demands. They don't know, perhaps, that our anger alone would be enough to destroy them. But there are some things, a few pre-revolutionary thoughts I had for us to think about together. We want to put a lid on this system that manufactures inequality. We want to put a cap on the unfettered accumulation of wealth and property by individuals as well as corporations. As capitalists and Liddites, we demand, 1, an end to cross-ownership in business. For example, weapons manufacturers cannot own TV stations. Mining corporations cannot run newspapers. Business houses cannot fund universities. Drug companies cannot control public health funds. 2, natural resources and essential infrastructure, water supply, electricity, health, and education cannot be privatized. 3, everybody must have a right to shelter, education, and health care. 4, the children of the rich cannot inherit their parents' wealth. This struggle has reawakened our imagination. Somewhere along the line, capitalism reduced the idea of justice to mean just human rights. The idea and the idea of dreaming of equality became blasphemous. We're not fighting to tinker with reforming a system that needs to be replaced. As a capist and a Lidite, I salute your struggle. Salam and Zimbad Dad. That's the end of the book. This is from the very opening of it, chapter 1. Is it a house or a home? A temple to the new India or a warehouse for its ghosts? Ever since Antilla arrived in Altamont Road in Mumbai, exuding mystery and a quiet menace, things have not been the same. Here we are, the friend who took me there said. Pay your respects to our new ruler. Antilla belongs to India's richest man, Mukesh Ambani. I'd read about this most expensive dwelling ever built, the 27 floors, 3 helipads, 9 lifts, hanging gardens, ballrooms, weather rooms, gymnasiums, 6 floors of parking, and 600 servants. Nothing had prepared me for the vertical lawn, a soaring 27-story high wall of grass attached to a vast metal grid. The grass was dry in patches, bits have fallen off in neat rectangles, clearly trickle down hadn't worked. But gush up certainly has. That's why in a nation of 1.2 billion, India's 100 richest people own assets equivalent to 1/4 of the GDP. And then Arundhati Roy goes on from there talking about how India is kind of an example of capitalism run amok. Capitalism, a Ghost Story by Arundhati Roy. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. You know, talking about the victims, another example of this is not just the Black Lives Matter response, but the response of all Americans right across the board to the killing of unarmed young black men that came into our living rooms courtesy of cameras in cell phones. So all of a sudden we're seeing, in real time or just shortly after the event, we're seeing Philando Castile being murdered. We're seeing Michael Brown being murdered. We're seeing, the list goes on and on and on of all these killings. And by the way, the example of the victim being visible, producing social change, and tip of the hat to Nate for this. Probably the best example, actually, is with regard to race relations, is Emmett Till. When his mother made that decision that she was going to have an open casket funeral after he had been so badly mutilated by these male white supremacists. And America saw that and was horrified by it. And, it stimulated a lot of change in the United States. So, step by step. Anyhow, Nathan in Los Angeles. Hey, Nathan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
Good. What's up?
Before you drop my call, I wanted to do a quick plug for my sister who's running for local office election tomorrow in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
But first, my opinion on the gun thing. I travel around the country for work, and I'm in many different cities. I've loaded a show into Mandalay Bay 3 days after the shooting there. And, I get into conversations with people, usually when they bring it up. And for those who are, hard set on no more gun control or no gun control, the guns don't kill people, people kill people thing. My argument is always just, Canada has a lot of guns, right?
Right.
And I think it's interesting that you touched on the white supremacy thing, because there's something that Canada doesn't have nearly to the extent that we have. So you might be onto something there.
Well, they do, but they've reconciled it, Nathan. Canada has, to a large extent, come to terms with their genocide of Native Americans.
Yeah.
And we have not.
And so, I then argue, look, it's gun control or an egalitarian society. You can't have this much unequalness in society and no gun control. And if you don't believe me, look at the evidence from this experiment that's being conducted right now, and we see the results. Choose what you want to have. Obviously, you can't have both.
Right. Yep. I agree. Well said, Nathan. Thank you. Oh, your sister. Plug your sister's candidacy.
So Carlisle, Pennsylvania. She's running for judge of election polls. It's precinct 3-3, I believe. Her name is Heather Champion, and for anyone who wants elections to be fair and for everyone to get their right to vote, she's definitely that's why she's doing it.
That's great. You said Heather Champion, like breakfast of?
Absolutely, Heather Champion.
Okay, cool.
She works at the local college there. She volunteers with Furry Friends Network as an animal activist, LGBTQ activist. An all-around great person, and wants everyone to have their fair shot.
That's wonderful. Okay, Nathan, I tell her we said hi and wish her the very best. Thanks a lot for the call. Billy in Wimberley, Texas. Hey, Billy, what's up?
How you doing, Tom? Listen, I was listening intently to your guy that was you had your conversation with about white supremacists.
Mm-hmm.
And I am a white, conservative, Southern male who owns guns, who lives in Texas. And it seems to me that y'all want to draw an equivalency between guys like me and these white supremacists. And I would submit to you that that isn't as unfair as me saying that all black people believe what the new Black Panther Party says and some of the obscene things that they come up with.
You mean you're talking about Billy? You're revealing the fact that you only watch Fox.
Is just wrong.
Yeah, Billy, you're kind of revealing the fact that you watch a lot of Fox News, because the new Black Panther Party it's a Fox boogeyman, right? It's like, oh my God, there's black people out there and they're scary. They're saying some scary things, and they've apparently got you rather scared too, Billy. But by the way, speaking of men, this from Science News, or from Nature magazine. This is the summary that I got this morning. The fossil record contains more male mammoths. This is as in woolly mammoths, the big, that look like elephants that used to be in North America more than 20,000 years ago. The fossil record contains more male mammoths than females, indicating that males were more likely to die in natural traps such as sinkholes and crevasses. Evolutionary biologist Love Dallin, who co-authored the study, says, quote, in many species, males tend to do somewhat stupid things that end up getting them killed in silly ways, and it appears that may have been true for mammoths also. Right. Barry in Sarasota, Florida. Hey, Barry, what's up?
I have a suggestion that I'd like to get your opinion. The whole thing with gun control and the Republicans and the Democrats going at each other and basically just butting heads and getting nothing done. If you recall, back, I think it might have been after I don't recall what shooting it was, but the Democrats had a sit-in in Congress.
Right.
And Paul Ryan...
That was after Newtown, wasn't it? Pulse. Oh, that's right, the Pulse nightclub. Thank you, Nate.
Okay. Paul Ryan said something to the extent of, I want to get back to doing the business of the people, or the people's business.
Right.
Well, I feel that if that's what he really wants to do, then maybe we should find out exactly what the business the people want done is. As far as, we could take surveys, but there's always, the NRA has a survey, somebody else has a survey, they go against each other. They've said that there's three types of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics. You can twist anything.
Yeah.
I'm thinking maybe, why don't we have a national referendum, non-binding, just to get an opinion next time we have a national election, and let's just find out exactly what the people want. And we can ask certain questions like, do you want assault military rifles banned? Are you in favor of having more stringent psychological checks on anyone who wants to own a gun? Are you in favor of more stringent criminal history checks? And in view of the one shooting in California, do you feel that anyone who's on the no-fly list or the terrorist watch list should be banned from having weapons?
Right.
And let's just find out exactly what
we already know, Barry. The vast majority of Americans want some kind of gun control. Now, there are a lot of gradations in there.
But the problem is that the Congress, they'll sit there and say, well, this survey said this. And
well, no, that's just BS. Paul Ryan, when Paul Ryan says the people's business, what he's talking about is who's scratching his back, who's paying him.
Exactly.
Who's paying him and who's paying the Republican Party. It's real simple. And we all know that it's the NRA and the weapons manufacturers.
Well,
and
the interesting thing is, from what I understand, most members of the NRA
want gun control.
I'm a gun owner, but I don't belong to the NRA. I'm a retired police officer, and I'm in favor of gun control. Everyone out there who basically has some sort of common sense is in favor of gun control, including most NRA members.
Yep. And most Republicans, actually.
My opinion is, let's find out exactly what the people want in this non-binding vote, this non-binding referendum, and then let's put them to task. Let's hold their feet to the fire, so to speak.
Yeah, Barry,
do what we want.
There's a couple of reasons why, arguably, that's a bad idea. And although generally speaking, anybody who brings an idea on my show, it's got to be a good idea, right? And my listeners are, brilliant. But the reason why direct democracy was rejected by the founders, in other words, the ability to do ballot initiatives and things at the national level, at a federal level,
was that the idea of a republic is that it doesn't bend to the whims of the day, that it has certain core values that it holds to, and they may not be popular, but they're still the core values, and therefore we hire politicians who can really dig deep into topics and subjects and know them well and learn them well and legislate what's best for the country, rather than just what either a majority or even a loud and obnoxious minority prefer. So I think that we've done the national referendums in the form of polling, and I don't know of any polling that suggests that the majority of Americans don't want some form of gun control. Do you?
I have no doubt that Americans do.
Yeah. So
the last thing anyone of any type of common sense wants is someone who's not qualified, either mentally or morally or physically,
right.
As far as knowledge, is someone out there with a dangerous weapon.
Yeah, but this is the problem with referenda is that they're also easily influenced. Here in Oregon, when I was living here 10 years ago, the conservatives came forward with a piece of legislation that they said, would make it impossible for Oregon legislators to raise taxes unless they can get a 2/3 majority in the Oregon legislature, which seems like, why should I object to that? Well, what it means is that the state is like in constant fiscal crisis, or could become. And it was just but they promoted that so aggressively before the vote that the people actually voted for it. So be careful. Barry, thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls. And we're going to check in with Talk Media News, too, right after this. And welcome back. Louise, watching Free Speech TV in Nantiglow, Pennsylvania. Am I saying that right, Louise?
Yes, you are.
Hey, what's up?
All right. It doesn't matter to me, and it shouldn't matter to anybody what color you are, black, white, orange, any color. The most important problem is we don't know how to love. We don't even know what love is. We're so far from it. I listened to those people on television that cried for all those children that were killed in this, including the preacher's daughter. What I have to say is, what do you think we're doing when we have abortions? Why aren't we crying for these people? If we only knew they are people too, we should be crying for them. God bless you.
Okay. Louise, thank you for your call. Matthew in Indianapolis, Indiana. Hey, Matthew, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thanks so much for taking my call. Sure. I've kind of just been sitting here weaving together some of the threads of your show today, and kind of want to paint a picture here, see what your response is. But regarding the shooting yesterday, it seems like with these mass shootings, the parties recently typically respond with, don't politicize these events, it's not the time, it's time to grieve and all that. When in all actuality, they don't actually have to do so, because conspiracy theory, media like Breitbart and the like, do the actual politicizing for them. So, like yesterday, within a few hours, everybody on social media knew that the shooter was an atheist, Muslim convert, and Antifa member. Just within hours. So everybody knew this already, so it's really determined. But kind of bringing it back, weaving back through with your...
Wait a minute, Matthew. The shooter was what?
Yeah, they
a PETA member, did you say?
That the shooter was Antifa, was atheist, and a Muslim convert.
Yeah, I don't believe any of it.
Yeah, so this kind of, like, there's this real fake news going on.
Yeah.
Like, these are the real instances of it. But kind of weaving it back to what you were talking about earlier with your book club, with the Robert Wright book, the where humans are made to see not reality, but to survive, right? So I've kind of been thinking a lot about how the whole public conversation's been going. And there's a lot of research into neuropsychological research of confirmation bias, why we see things the way that we do, and we unquestioningly do so.
Right.
And even when we have new data that would suggest reality might be different from what we think it is, we cannot hear that new data. And what they find is that when someone is confronted by a worldview that is different from their own, the response, the reaction, is actually that we go into that survival mode. So because it questions our fundamental sense of reality, we tend to go into survival mode. And, when someone is in survival mode, we tend to see things in two categories.
Matthew, we're going to hit a break here in a second. What's your point?
Sure. Basically just that when we get into these survival modes, we see things in two categories. Something that'll save us or destroy us. And it seems that the marketing pitches of the different parties' campaigns are constantly putting us in that which is going to harm us.
Right. And that stress makes us more vulnerable to those. That's interesting. Matthew, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Hey, let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. On the line with us, Victoria Jones with Talk Media News. Hey, Victoria.
Hey, Tom.
So what's going on in the world today?
Well, you were talking about my top story, which, of course, is the Texas church shooting.
Yes.
As you, I'm sure, know, the gunman who opened fire in a small Texas church, killing 26 people during worship service yesterday morning, which, by the way, is 7% of the population of that town. The youngest, I believe, was 18 months old. He sent threatening text messages to his mother-in-law before the attack, and it appeared to stem from a domestic situation. Investigators have concluded that the attack was not racially or religiously motivated.
Right, and his mother-in-law did not show up in church Sunday morning, and therefore was spared.
Right.
This is following in the long tradition of men who abuse their wives and girlfriends, growing up to become mass shooters, essentially.
Yes, either mass shooters or killing the wives and girlfriends.
Yeah.
Killing somebody.
Yep. Pretty grim.
For some reason, yes, extremely grim. Kellyanne Conway, counselor to the President of the United States, said in an interview today that that Democrats were to be criticized for pointing fingers by calling for increased gun control measures, and she said that their quick reaction was disrespectful to the dead. She said the rush to judgment, particularly by people who just see politics and Trump derangement in every single thing they do, it doesn't help the victims, and it's disrespectful to the dead, she said.
Jeez. This whole, there's no time to talk about it. For the hopes and prayers, thoughts and prayers, thoughts and prayers, thoughts and prayers. We don't need any more damn thoughts and prayers. We need some legislation.
It's interesting that after this shooting and after Las Vegas, just looking at it in an analysis point of view, as somebody who, I'm not in the White House today because the president's in Japan tonight, but after the Las Vegas shooting I was, and too soon to talk about it, but after the New York shooting, it was not too soon to talk about it. It was immediate to talk about it.
Right. Well, that wasn't a shooting. That was a car killing.
Sorry, that was a different kind of an attack. But it was not too soon to talk about it.
Right.
It was, again, a mass killing, but it was not too soon to talk about it.
Right, because the guy involved was a Muslim.
So it's interesting. Different kinds of killings and different kinds of killers bring about different reactions. Right. Other things going on. Remember that, speaking of the president was coming from his golf club last weekend, I believe it was, in his motorcade, and a woman was on her bike riding, and the motorcade passed her, and she flipped him off. Do you see that picture? It went viral.
I did, yeah.
Yes, she's been fired from her job.
Of course.
Yes.
She worked for a defense contractor, right?
Yes, she's called Julie Briskman, and apparently her bosses told her she'd violated their social media policy because she'd used the photo as her profile picture on social media. They said, we're separating from you, Briskman said. Basically, you cannot have lewd or obscene things on your social media. So they were calling flipping him off obscene, she said. She worked in marketing and communications at Akima LLC.
Right.
She said when she saw Trump's motorcade, her blood just started to boil. I'm thinking DACA recipients are getting kicked out. He pulled out for open enrollment in Obamacare, Briskman said. Anyway, she said, in some ways I'm doing better than ever.
That's amazing. She works for Yakima. I mean, they may be a defense contractor, but principally they're a company that provides streaming services to other companies.
Akima, not Yakima. Akima.
Oh, okay. A different
Akima,
company.
yes.
I see. Okay. All right. So
Fiji's prime minister today called for a sense of urgency in the fight against global warming, telling negotiators we must not fail our people, as he opened 2 weeks of talks on implementing the Paris Accord on combating climate change, which is already affecting his island nation, obviously. There are diplomats and activists gathered in Bonn, and so these talks are going to be going on for the next couple of weeks. This is the first big climate conference since President Trump announced that the U.S. will pull out of the Paris Accord unless he can get a better deal. So we'll see how that goes. And the Fiji Prime Minister said that the need for urgency is obvious. Our world is in distress from the extreme weather events caused by climate change. He didn't directly refer to the Trump administration's position, but he did appear to play off Trump's America's first. He said the only way for every nation to put itself first is to lock arms with all other nations and move forward together.
Makes sense.
Representative Kamala Harris from California is requesting information from Alkermes, which is the maker of an opioid addiction treatment, over recent news reports alleging that this pharmaceutical company aggressively lobbied to increase its sales. Now, it's a drug called Vivitrol, and apparently it's targeting at law enforcement officials and lawmakers, and also assignment of sales representatives to judges overseeing drug courts and free shots to inmates leaving jails and prisons. And what it is, it's a monthly shot that's used to treat addiction. Mm-hmm. And she says that they are saying that that it's unfairly painting itself as the best option for addiction, whereas different drugs are meant for different patients. And so she's requesting information from this company about that.
This is Senator Harris.
Yes, Senator Harris.
Right.
Law professors are accusing President Trump of acting like a dictator in blocking critics from his Twitter account. Georgetown Law's Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection filed a friend of the court brief today on behalf of 7 professors, and they are challenging his ability to block opponents from his @RealDonaldTrump Twitter feed.
Yeah, we'll see how that...
You can't do it.
I could see that argument be made around @POTUS. I think it's going to be a whole lot harder to make that argument around @RealDonaldTrump, but we'll see. We'll see. It's fascinating. Victoria Jones, thank you. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you very much.
Great talking with you. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Today on the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, we're reading from Barbara Honegger's book, October Surprise. The October Surprise the book is about was the 1980 Reagan campaign led by Bill Casey, who Reagan later made the head of the CIA, but he was Reagan's campaign director in 1980, about their actions with the Iranian government, cutting a deal where if the Iranians would hold the hostages throughout the election of 1980 to make Jimmy Carter look bad and weak, then if they won the election, they would sell weapons to Iran, which, of course, is a deal that they kept. We know of this as the Iran-Contra scandal. So I'm reading from the very last chapter. It's the epilogue, and it's titled A Kinder, Gentler Nation. President Reagan signed intelligence authorizations in 1984 and 1985, which were considered licenses to kill, according to top government officials. As we have seen, Oliver North and Amiram Nir's U.S.-Israeli covert operations were authorized by a still-secret accord, never revealed to congressional intelligence committees as required by law, which may have also authorized political assassinations in the name of counterterrorism. We have seen that Vice President George Bush, this is the elder, met with Amiram Nir in Israel in late 1986, when he could have signed the accord with Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres, for whom Nir worked. Author Seymour Hersh has charged Oliver North with being President Reagan's assassination planner. We've reviewed reports that North boasted that anyone who leaked or threatened to reveal the administration's secret Iran initiative would be killed, and that some of the North Secord Hakim team were reportedly involved in political assassinations under the umbrella of counterterrorism. Given this context, it's instructive to note what has happened to many of the individuals who were reportedly involved in or knew about the secret negotiations between Iran and the 1980 Reagan-Bush campaign, and or about secret U.S. arms deliveries to the Khomeini regime in the early 1980s. So then she goes through the list of people. Dead: William Casey, CIA director, who reportedly attended meetings in Paris, France on October 19 and 20, 1980 with Iranian officials and agents of French intelligence to arrange an arms for hostages delay deal with Iran. The morning of Casey's first scheduled under oath testimony before the Senate Intelligence Committee on the secret Iran initiative, he was struck by seizures in his CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, and underwent speech incapacitating left brain surgery shortly thereafter. Had he lived to testify, according to a lifelong friend and counsel, Milton Gould, Casey would have told, quote, the entire truth, end quote. He died on May 6, 1987. Dead: Amiram Nir died November 30th, 1988, in a plane crash in Mexico. Nir, who resigned in March of 1988, had been chief counterterrorism advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres. He was Oliver North's Israeli counterpart in the near-North covert operations covered by a still-secret accord reportedly signed by Peres and President Reagan, or according to some U.S. government sources, by someone at a lower level. Easily Vice President George Bush during his late 1986 meeting with Nir in Jerusalem, when Nir briefed Bush on the Iran arms initiative. Informed sources suspect sabotage of Nir's plane when Oliver North sought to introduce the secret U.S.-Israel accord as part of the defense in his trial on conspiracy charges. The Reagan-Bush administration refused to produce the document, and the conspiracy charge was dropped. Nir died 2 months before the start of Oliver North's trial. The truth of the final entry in Michael Ledine's book, Perilous Statecraft, may have something to do with his timely death. Quote, Insofar as anyone may have had something dramatically new to add to our knowledge of Iran-Contra, it is likely to be Amiram Nir. Dead. Cyrus Hashemi died in London on July 21st, 1986, 2 days after being diagnosed as having a rare, virulent form of fast-acting cancer. Died 2 days after his diagnosis. According to Iranian-American arms dealer Hoshaglavi, with whom he worked on a major Iran arms-related sting operation in the 1985 and early 86, Hashemi was assassinated by U.S. government agents. According to self-proclaimed CIA pilot Richard Brennicky, Hashemi had been a participant in the October 20, 1980 Paris meeting with 1980 Reagan-Bush campaign manager Bill Casey, Iran arms dealer Houshang Lavi, Iranian officials, and agents of French intelligence to work out the original arms for hostage delay deal with Iran. Before his death, Hashemi was reported to have said that his 1981-82 U.S. arms sales to Iran had been necessary to obtain the release of the 52 U.S. hostages, released moments after Reagan's inauguration in 1981, and had been approved by the CIA, which Casey headed. Hashemi was also the instigator of the arms for hostages proposal, which resulted in the August 1985 TOW missile shipment to Iran. Dead. The Ayatollah Mohammad Beheshti, who reportedly sent a personal representative, according to one source, Jalal al-Din Farsi, to the pre-election Paris meeting of October 19, 1980, with 1980 Reagan-Bush campaign manager Bill Casey, and according to some reports, also with George Herbert Walker Bush. Beheshti died in a bomb explosion at Islamic Republican Party headquarters in Iran on June 28, 1981. Dead. William Buckley, CIA station chief in Beirut. And it continues. It's October Surprise by Barbara Honegger.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is Lisa Stokey. She is the founder and executive director of Next 7 and co-director of Food Democracy Now. Next7.org is the website. And Lisa, and you can tweet Lisa at Lisa_STOKKE. Lisa, welcome to the program.
Hi, it's so great to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for joining us. So the Food and Drug Administration has created, and correct me, in fact, jump in and interrupt me at any point if I get any of this wrong.
USDA.
The USDA. Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
the USDA established standards for what is organic. If you want to label something as organic, it's got to be, made, grown, produced, whatever, in a certain way. And they want to extend those standards to things that are produced hydroponically. Why is that a bad idea?
Well, I tell you what, those that would like to have hydroponic certified organic have done a really good job at trying to confuse the issue. But, for myself and, other advocates and certainly, long-time pioneering organic farmers who help to write the standards and have been farming organically for decades are really super clear, that organic has always been in the soil. Nurturing the soil, building the soil, growing in the soil has always been a foundation of organic agriculture. And so, just looking at that, simple aspect of it, right, that soil is foundational, hydroponic doesn't really fit in with that, right? Because, a plant is getting its nutrients from a nutrient solution and not from, the rich, fertile soil that organic farmers build. And so, sadly, we had that vote last week and we lost that vote, that our National Organic Standards Board could not agree that the foundation of organic is in the soil. And so, a lot of organic farmers around the country today are really finding themselves in a very unique and situation, I would say. And USDA has proven itself to not be a good partner for farmers.
So, okay, so with soil, Let's define terms here. Dirt is ground up rock. Soil is ground up rock combined with massive amounts of organic material and living organisms, literally billions of living organisms per teaspoon. That is soil. And all those living organisms interact with things growing in that soil to transport nutrients, for example. You see, fungi performing this, bacteria performing that function. All of that goes away when you do something hydroponically. You're just delivering, water and nutrients directly to the roots of the plant, without the benefit of assistance by fungi and bacteria and viruses or whatever.
That's
so you've got
right,
that, number one. And number two, typically in hydroponic, at least the hydroponic operations that I've seen over the years, there's a lot of plastic piping and plastic tubing, and this soft plastic releases estrogen mimicking chemicals. So I don't, unless you're going to do hydroponic gardening with stainless steel pipes or water pipes, glass pipes to carry the water that are not, reactive with the water. I don't see how could you call that organic?
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're 100% right. You're spot on. And, this is the question, that we've been raising as well at next7.org. And maybe you saw our emails that we put out. And, in 48 hours before the meeting, I got almost 100,000 people, to sign on to this and say that just exactly what you're saying, that butter lettuce grown, floating in styrofoam, in water, in a nutrient solution, and plastic tubing with phthalates, just like what you were saying, that we know to be harmful, right? Endocrine disrupting chemicals. That's not organic. And, and you're 100% right. And like I said, it's really a disturbing situation that we're in, because millions of consumers, people, citizens rely upon, the organic label. And it just isn't, it's just the shadow, of what it used to be. And organic is now a victim of its own success.
Right. So basically what you've got now are companies that have figured out using hydroponic technologies, they can grow more food faster without the need for farms, without the need for as much dirt or soil.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say you're touching on that there, that it's just another, avenue for consolidation in our food industry, right?
Right.
This is like the new CAFO, confined animal feeding operation, and GMO model, that they have now implemented here. And you're right. The people that have invested in hydroponic and are looking to have it certified as organic are people like who? Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, who just bought Whole Foods. And yes, they can have higher profit margins when they are growing food hydroponically, right? As opposed to paying, and supporting.
Does Whole Foods produce Does Whole Foods produce any of their own food? I thought they were just a retailer.
What is happening now, and this is still emerging, right? Because that sale, of Whole Foods to Amazon is still pretty fresh, right? Pretty recent. But there are stories, in TechCrunch. There's a story that came out a few months ago about how Jeff Bezos and Eric Schmidt of Amazon and Google, respectively, have invested in a company called Plenty. Plenty is a hydroponic operation. The Plenty representatives and lobbyists were crawling at the meeting last week, the National Organic Standards Board meeting. As these meetings are, it's a lot of industry folks that show up and try to convince, the National Organic Program and the National Organic Standards Board, to, allow things into the organic program that really, quite frankly, don't belong, that are not organic.
Yeah.
And so this is, no pun intended, but this is really a watering down, of the organic standards in a very significant way. And, from my perspective, as a mother, I have 4 children. I've been feeding my kids organically since day one. My oldest is 26 years old. And, people like myself, mothers and all kinds of people rely upon that organic label, to know that it is like the, nutrient-dense food that not only is, good food, right? That doesn't have pesticides and GMOs, but also has those, rich nutrients from the soil, but also that it's nurturing the future. And that's what Next 7 is about. It's about nurturing the next 7 generations, right? And not thinking about just the next 7 days or the next 7 years even, right? But, in all of our decisions to be thinking about how we are helping the next 7 generations and having more of those soil-based, good, salt-of-the-earth organic farmers, having more of those and growing that. We're at less than 1% right now of all of our agricultural land. It's less than 1% of it's organic. And we need to be growing that, right? Because that's our solution. Organic farmers, regenerative farmers, they sequester carbon from the atmosphere, right? Which is what we need to do to help mitigate the effects of climate change, right? And we're building that soil to have more nutrient-dense food. So this is really, really an unfortunate time, for the USDA and the National Organic Program to be essentially throwing rocks.
Is this entirely Lisa, we have a little less than a minute. Is this entirely at the USDA? Is there a trade association involved in this? Is there some, industry group that's pushing this?
Yeah, that's a good question. And a lot of people think that they misunderstand me when I tell them that the Organic Trade Association has actually been against us on this. They have been lobbying in favor of hydroponics and organics.
So they're representing the manufacturers or the farmers, as it were. Yeah. Lisa, we're out of time. But Lisa Stokey, the founder and executive director of Next 7, NEXT7.org is the website. Lisa, thanks so much for dropping by.
Oh, thank you so much, Tom.
Good talking to you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of your calls and more of the news of the day as well right after this. Back. Oh, there we go. And welcome back. Ralph in San Diego. Hey, Ralph, what's on your mind today?
Hello.
Hey, Ralph. What's up?
Hey, Tom. I want to thank you for featuring this organic crisis. This thing has been bubbling up for a long time, and unfortunately, we lost it at the the NOSD, the National Organic Standards Board.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to comment that I'm impressed at your grasp of soil science. I know you probably don't realize it, but you were pretty much on the money with your description of soil as compared to water-based agriculture.
Yeah, or compared to dirt, which is what our soil is being turned into as it's being killed off.
We've lost an enormous amount of soil over the last 50 or 60 years of industrial agriculture.
Oh, 100 years ago, you had soil levels that were 5-6 feet deep in the Midwest, and now it's down to a foot or less in a lot of places.
Exactly. This is the point, and this is the hidden promise of organics, is soil restoration.
Yep.
And these guys have now undermined it.
Yeah, hydroponics really undermines it because it completely goes around it. Excellent points, Ralph. Excellent points. Thanks a lot for the call. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what's up?
Yeah, I hate to change the conversation back, which actually my co-op does not, it sells hydroponics, but it won't sell it as organic.
Right.
But anyway, that's a whole other matter. But I wanted to say, I think violence is the fuel of empires, and we're kind of new we're the new kid on the block. But I mean, if I don't wish that we could descend any lower than we seem to be descending. But I think that violence goes just so deep into the psyche of people, and it's really about how we treat each other. And I'm surprised in a way that we're not more violent, considering all the violence that we get from being lied to, from politicians, just doing, just passing legislation that's just absolutely horrible to a lot of innocent people. I just gave $10 to somebody who was out on the street in a wheelchair. I don't think you probably see that in Denmark, but I could be wrong. I haven't been there recently. So, I think that, violence is not going to, you have to adjust the legal system, obviously, and talk about the structure of our society, anything that might, enhance it. But I think that you're not going to probably contain it. There's a lot of animosity, a lot of hatred. Just look at a Trump rally, and you can see that. There was on national news somebody who said, next time I'm going to kill you. Right there on national news, I heard that. I think it was on CNN when there was somebody, at a Trump rally that wasn't supporting Donald Trump and pointing out something. I can't remember what it was, but he got punched in the face by somebody. And we really don't, we seem to, just gloss over that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But, it's so, there's so much violence that we do. And I have to say, probably I've done it myself through speech, through...
John, we're out of time, but excellent point. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Larry in Lancaster, California. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. There's roughly 320 million people in the United States. You talk about why there's more whites killing. Roughly 197 million whites in the United States compared to 50 million of minorities. So, of course, there's going to be more whites killing.
Well, according to your numbers, it would be 3-1, right?
Yeah.
So why is it that for every 3 mass shootings by a white guy, there isn't one by a black guy?
Well, just before this white shooting, there was a black guy that killed white people in a church, and you already talked about that.
I think you're talking about the white guy who killed black people in a church. That was Dylan Stormroof.
A couple months ago, there was a black guy that went into a white church and killed a few people, like 3 or 4 people.
How did I miss that? How did Fox not turn that into a whole week news cycle?
They talked about it. I don't remember when it happened, but
Yeah.
The point is there's a lot more white people in the United States, so of course there's going to be more whites get killing, and it offends me when you make it sound like we're all bad people. You don't like it when we say radical Islam. We're not talking about majority of the Islam. We're talking about the people that are radicalized that are doing the killing.
Right, I'm talking about bigoted white people.
But you don't say that. You say white men. You don't say bigoted white. If you want to say radical white men, it clarifies that there's a few white people in America that commit these crimes, but the majority of white people don't.
Yeah, I'm starting to wonder about that majority of white people, Larry. Larry, thanks for the call. Good luck. Brandon in Jacksonville, Illinois. Hey, Brandon, you wanted to talk about medical cannabis and guns?
Yeah, quickly first, I would like to guess about the obvious. I have no opinion on it as a white male, but I would guess that the military-industrial complex owners and gun owners are not white, or not white males. Most of them are white males.
Yeah.
And I have a medical cannabis card in the state of Illinois. It's state issued.
Mm-hmm.
And you had a caller the other day that was talking about voter rights and Reverend Barber and how they're accepting the federal owner identification card. That's the FOID card for Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
And with my medical cannabis card, I am not allowed my Second Amendment right of obtaining a FOID card. And I just wondered what your thoughts were about that.
Well, that's interesting. Just in Illinois, they will not allow you to.
No, they won't allow you to have the firearm card with the medical cannabis card because federally cannabis is illegal, but they issued both of the cards. And I can understand if it was a concealed carry or a cannabis. I could understand that. But just having a medication in your house and a firearm in your house, I am not allowed that.
That's weird. That's a state law? That's Illinois state law?
That's Illinois state law. And I've talked to my representative here in the 100th District, and I'm talking to my senator in the 50th District about this issue also.
Well, mixing guns and intoxicants, broadly speaking, is a bad idea. But I think that the evidence is in that pot is a less vigorous intoxicant than alcohol. And people are, anybody who's ever smoked it knows that people are much less likely to get involved in violent altercations if they're stoned rather than if they're drunk.
Correct,
for
and
example.
that's what I was saying about not having a concealed carry and a cannabis.
Right.
Just having protection of a gun in your home and a medical cannabis card is not allowed in Illinois either.
Yeah, it's amazing. Brandon, I'm going to have to do some research on this. I don't have a specific solution or opinion to offer you right now, but let me get into it. Fred in Los Angeles. Hey, Fred, what's up?
Yeah, hi. How you doing?
Good. What's on your mind?
Good. First of all, I want to thank you for expanding all of our minds, even when you don't necessarily realize it.
You're welcome.
Earlier this morning, I'm on the West Coast, you were talking about, or you were comparing cars, driver's license and a license for a firearm.
Right.
Now, regards to Charlottesville, he used a car to kill people, not a gun.
Right.
What happened with regards to insurance? Was he insured?
Well, he had to be. He had to be. I mean, it's possible that he was uninsured, but I doubt it.
So what happened with regards to the insurance covering the people that were killed and the people that were injured?
I don't have firsthand, doing the reporter on the ground thing. I haven't tracked these people down and asked them. But the way it should work is that the liability insurance associated with that vehicle and that driver would pay whatever the limits of the liability are to the people that he hit.
Should pay unless they figure out, unless the insurance company figures a way to get out of it.
Well, yeah, I mean, he had a rental vehicle. He had rented that car from it wasn't U-Haul. It was one of those companies that rents trucks, and it was Home Depot. In fact, he had rented it from Home Depot. So if they have the option of you can rent without insurance, maybe, but I just don't know, Fred. I don't know, and it would be wrong of me to say that I do. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
More of the news of the day and your thoughts and mine right after this. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Crisis Without End. This is a collection of essays about nuclear power compiled by Helen Caldicott and edited by Helen Caldicott. I'm reading from the introduction which she wrote. She is the world-famous Australian pediatrician, physician who has been speaking out about nuclear power and whatnot for years and years. On March 11, 2011, an earthquake measuring 9 on the Richter scale struck off the east coast of Japan.
Within days, the ensuing tsunami had induced the meltdown of 3 of the 6 nuclear reactors at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. During the earthquake, the external power supply was lost to the reactor complex. The pumps that circulate up to 1 million gallons of water per minute to cool each reactor core ceased to function. Emergency diesel generators situated below the plants kicked in, but these were soon swamped by the tsunami. Without cooling, the radioactive cores in units 1, 2, and 3 began to melt within hours. Over the next few days, all 3 cores, each weighing up to 100 tons, melted their way through 6 inches of steel at the bottom of their reactor vessels and oozed their way onto the concrete floor of the containment buildings, a fact that the Japanese government and Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO, the power plant operator, continued to deny for months after the disaster. At the same time, the zirconium cladding covering thousands of uranium fuel rods reacted with water to create hydrogen, which initiated hydrogen explosions in units 1, 2, 3, and 4. Massive quantities of radiation escaped into the air and water, 3 times more noble gases, argon, xenon, and krypton, than at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant accident in 1986, and huge amounts of other volatile and non-volatile radioactive elements, including cesium, tritium, iodine, strontium, silver, plutonium, americium, and rubidium. Fukushima is now described as the greatest industrial accident in history. The Japanese government considered plans to evacuate 35 million people from Tokyo as other reactors, including 4 at Fukushima Daini, several miles along the coast from Fukushima Daiichi, were also at risk. Meanwhile, thousands of people fled the area around the smoldering reactors, but they were not notified when the radioactive plumes were traveling, despite the fact that there was a system in place to track the plumes. As a result, people fled directly into regions with the highest radiation concentrations, where they were exposed to high levels of whole-body external gamma radiation, inhaling radioactive air, and swallowing radioactive elements. Administering inert potassium iodide to the exposed people would have blocked the uptake of radioactive iodine in the thyroid glands. Unfortunately, it was not supplied except in the town of Miharu, where there was a conscientious mayor. Prophylactic iodine was, however, distributed to the staff of Fukushima Medical University in the days following the accident, after extremely high levels of radioactive iodine, 1.9 million becquerels per kilogram, were discovered in leafy vegetables near the university. Iodine contamination was already widespread in leafy vegetables and milk, while other isotopic contamination from substances such as cesium was widespread in vegetables, fruit, meat, milk, rice, and tea in many areas of Japan. Fukushima disaster is not over and will not end for many millennia. The radioactive fallout, which has covered vast swaths of Japan, will remain toxic for hundreds of thousands of years. It cannot simply be cleaned up, and it will continue to contaminate food, humans, and animals. It is unlikely that the 3 Fukushima Daiichi reactors that experienced total meltdowns will ever be deassembled or decommissioned. TEPCO claims such a massive undertaking will take them at least 30 to 40 years. The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, predicts that it will be more than 40 years before any progress can be made because of the dangerous levels of radioactivity at the damaged reactors. This accident is identical to the Chernobyl catastrophe in its medical implications. The Fukushima meltdowns will induce an epidemic of cancer as people ingest radioactive elements. The single meltdown and explosion at Chernobyl contaminated 40% of the European landmass. Already, according to a 2009 report published by the New York Academy of Sciences, over 1 million people have perished as a result directly of that catastrophe. Large parts of Europe will remain radioactive for hundreds of years, as will now be the case in Japan. In assessing the impact of the Fukushima disaster on Japan and on the planet, and in assessing the safety of nuclear power overall, it is imperative to understand and evaluate the biological and medical consequences of exposure to the kinds of radioactive elements that were released during an accident at a nuclear power plant. Fact 1, no dose of radiation is safe. Each dose received by the body is cumulative and adds to the risk of developing malignancy or genetic disease. Fact 2, children are 10 to 20 times more vulnerable to the carcinogenic effects of radiation than adults. Females tend to be more sensitive than males, while fetuses and immunocompromised patients are also extremely sensitive. Fact 3, high doses of radiation received from a nuclear meltdown or from weapons explosions can cause acute radiation sickness, including hair loss, severe nausea, diarrhea, and bleeding. Reports of these illnesses, particularly among children, appeared within the first few months after the Fukushima accident. And then it goes on, the types of ionizing radiation. Crisis Without End by Helen Keller. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Interesting conversations going on in both our chat room and Twitter about this whole thing. What do we do about all these guns? What do we do about our society? What do we do about our culture that seems to be in the midst of some kind of meltdown? Scott in Alameda, California. Hey, Scott, what's on your mind today?
Hey, first, the caller earlier who was wondering if there was any way to teach constitutional rights, for assembly and all that. There's somebody doing that. It's Colin Kaepernick. He has a thing called Know Your Rights Camp, and he goes around to middle schools all across the country teaching civil rights. He's really, I think we're witnessing the birth of a civil rights icon, and I couldn't be happier about it.
Wow.
So anyway, but the other thing I wanted to call about was we really need to pay attention to what the FBI is doing, the failures of the FBI, particularly in the Vegas shooting, and wondering about now this Texas shooting, the church shooting. In the Vegas shooting, there's a really big problem with the timeline, and nobody's addressing it. First of all, the chief of police of Las Vegas was hung out to dry there at all those press conferences, where you would think a special agent of the FBI would have stepped in and been involved in those press conferences. I don't know if you saw any of those press conferences days after, where the chief of police was just out of his mind with fatigue and was just babbling, and it was incredible. I'm wondering where the special agent is. Why isn't this a federal case? Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, FBI, whatever.
Scott, I'm sure FBI and ATF were on the ground.
Okay, but here's the question.
There's no doubt about it.
What's the problem with the timeline? The timeline is a huge problem. There's a 6-minute gap between the security guard getting shot and the guy opening fire on the crowd.
Right, which might reflect poorly on the company that owns the hotel, that they didn't notify the police, or it might reflect poorly on the police. Scott, I get it, but that is not, Scott, thanks for the call. That is not my concern. I don't care about the 6-minute gap. My concern is that another white guy got a whole bunch of guns and killed a whole bunch of people. And we need to be attending to this, and we need to be talking about the victims. We need to be talking about what happens when a bullet hits a body. And how our weapons industry has created bullets that are far more destructive than just 30, 40 years ago. These bullets, fragmentation bullets, bullets that fall apart in your body to rip up more tissue, to cause more damage. I mean, this is a brutal, bloody, and gruesome industry that has inflicted its products on us and promoted them mercilessly, to the point that you've got people who actually feel that their personal identity, their sense of who they are, is defined in part by their relationship to a piece of weaponry. Jay in North Hollywood, California. Hey, Jay, what's up?
Hey, yeah, that last caller, I mean, that was ridiculous. That was a complete distraction from the issue.
My point.
6 minutes is irrelevant. Yeah, I don't get that one at all. I thought you touched on something that was very, actually, it sparked it was a good analysis that you had, was that minority groups tend to have a level of compassion that the average white person, or particularly white male, actually lacks.
Right.
And I think that may be one of the reasons that there's not a major revolt from particularly the African-American community, but also other minority groups, is because we're always in this constant struggle with trying to get along and have a cooperation and try to convince the white folks that don't mean harm, but maybe are ignorant to a certain level because they aren't the victim of the white supremacy.
Right, they're blissfully inserted in their privilege.
Exactly. And for me, as an African-American male, sorry to point that out, I know some folks don't like that, but me as an African-American male, going through predominantly white schools growing up, there was one year that I was totally in an all-black school too, but that's a side issue. But going to predominantly white schools and having predominantly white friends, I have noticed that I probably would have been thinking a lot more along the lines of the typical white person because I had to fit in and that's what I knew. But once I got to the age of about 18 and dealt with insanely overt racism from a small percentage of white males, but a very dangerous percentage, even if it's a small amount. I mean, the amount of power that certain police officers have, not most, but I've come across a few of them, and other, I'm sorry to lump them in with white supremacists, but a few of them, they're pretty overt when it's you and when it's a one-on-one situation.
Yep.
And it changes your thinking just literally based on your experience that you have no choice but to change the way you think. And I'm, sorry for the rant, but...
No, it's an excellent rant, Jay.
I thought I threw that out.
It's an excellent rant, and this is, this is the whole thing about white privilege, is never having to deal with race. It's the biggest bonus for white people of white privilege is that they don't have to think about race, and so they say these stupid things like, I don't think about race, I don't think about color. Well, that's asserting white privilege.
Exactly, and if you walk down the street and somebody else attacks you or approaches you, it's not about what I'm thinking at that moment. It's what is this person thinking about, and why does he have this hostility towards me?
Right.
I have to be aware of that, of that danger. And so I'm forced to think in terms of race, because what I do, my actions can have a detrimental effect to the outcome of my safety or me getting a job or working.
Sure.
Or just
could lead to your death.
Insert any scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent points, Jay. And that was the essence of my point. And this isn't brilliant original thinking on my part at all. There's no shortage of studies that show that the lower a person is on a social or economic power scale, the more empathetic and compassionate they tend to be. And the higher somebody is on an economic and power scale, the less empathetic and compassionate they tend to be. And it's simply a matter of, it's almost math. It's if you've got that power and you don't have to worry about race, then most people take advantage of that. They don't worry about race and they use that power. And go ahead.
I was just can I add one small thing and then that's it?
Yeah.
If I, as a black man, had not gone through certain experiences, I would still think, I'm black and there's a race thing there, but nothing dramatic happened to me. So I'd also perhaps look at other black folks, perhaps, people that may start Black Lives Matter or those that support Colin Kaepernick with the protests, et cetera, et cetera. I may even look at them as a black person and say, you guys are too extreme, you're taking things too far. But when something extreme happens to you directly, that wake-up call will never leave you. And it's happened to me many times, but for some of us it only happens once. For others it happens 12 times, but whatever the case may be, when you have that earth-shattering wake-up call, it changes you forever.
Yeah.
And the sad part about it is, it's a part of life, but the sad part is there's nothing you can do about it other than to deal with that horror for the rest of your life.
And I think
that's all
I think that for some people, that realization of the extraordinary power that is held by the institutions of government and by the representatives of government, who very often abuse that power, in the case of policing black people, for example, that is something that is only very rarely acknowledged. And for a lot of people who were participants in the civil rights movement and in the anti-war movement back in the 60s and early 70s, white folks who thought that they had privilege and power, and then discovered that they were getting beaten up, they were getting arrested, they were getting, or shipped off to Vietnam and shot at. There was, I think, a similar awakening among some white people back in the 60s and 70s as a result of that. But I get what you're saying, Jay, that no white person can know what it's like to be a black person, confronted by the police. But I'm hopeful that more and more of these narratives start making their way into popular culture, into things like movies and television and whatnot. So, because this is one of the ways that we can experience other people's lives and develop empathy and compassion.
The dangerous part when you say that, I mean, it's great. It's like making progress. Yes, it's like police cameras, cameras for police, and then people are learning about some of the earth-shattering situations that could happen to some minority groups. But you see what happens is racism was so overt decades ago, and now it's not overt, and it's slick, and it's this elusive kind of, that the racism is there, but it's so slick and elusive. And the danger I fear, and I hope I'm just being way too pessimistic, but I see, you have some optimism here. My fear is that as some of that story gets told, that racism evolves again and it becomes elusive again. In fact, there's some new way to get us.
Jay, that's always going to be the case. I mean, there has, from the beginning of what we call Western civilization, the Epic of Gilgamesh 7,000 years ago, there have always been small groups of people who want to exploit other people. And one of the laziest ways to do it is to exploit them based on race. So that's going to continue. But we need to...
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
But we need to be having these conversations, and we need to be waking people up to this stuff. And Jay, you did a brilliant job of it today. Thank you so much for the call. It's great to hear from you. Thanks for listening to Sirius XM. We'll be right back. No? Welcome back. Rich in Calumet, Michigan. Hey, Rich, what's on your mind?
Well, I was calling about the hydroponic thing. I'm a grower myself, and I do things about 95 to 98% hydroponic.
What are you growing?
When you're doing indoor stuff, there's you have artificial light. Not all your pots are always, but I make all my own soil. I do everything as natural as possible. But you still can't mimic the outdoors and what Mother Nature does. I mean, all the plants, everything outdoors, they're not only chemically but electrically. Their whole, I can't think of the word. They're all attached. Mm-hmm. You cut down one tree, all the other trees around them bump up their toxins and things like that because they don't know they're being attacked.
They all go into shock,
and they're another living thing just as we are on this planet. And in this conversation that you've had through this last half hour to hour has been amazing because we're just as important as the plants and everything else. And if we don't figure out how to all work together, along with growing natural foods and just naturally learning how to get along, I don't know what's going to happen.
Well, I think the good news is, Rich, that other societies have figured out how to do this. Australia, with regard to guns, for example, and it's not like we're facing impossible challenges and totally lacking solutions. There are a lot of good solutions there, and these are man-made situations. These are man and woman-made situations. We can fix them. Rich, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Bob in Burlington, Vermont. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind?
Oh, I just wanted to follow up on that excellent call before the last guy, Jay. Mm-hmm. A wise old man in Tacoma Park, Maryland, once told me your personality is the sum total of your environment. And I think that one of the things that we don't look at enough in terms of, like a lot of these guys that are not terrorist related, just regular old murderers, seem to be thinking that they're the same guys that always talk about what the Constitution says and how it's supposed to be interpreted and things like that. And I really think that when society is not holding authoritarian figures like cops who kill people to a higher standard of behavior, we see that trickling down into all this other crap, and it's just something we should be doing. Another side point is, you mentioned ammunition a while ago. I recall back in the early 80s when something called a black talon bullet that would penetrate armor came out. It was off the market in like 6 months. So these things can happen.
Right, but that was because it was penetrating the bulletproof vests that police officers wear.
Yeah.
And so
Kevlar didn't stand a chance.
Right. So the wrath of God came down on it, on that product from the police. But, if it's just being used to shoot us up, although the reality is, Bob, that most police officers are all in favor of gun control. I mean, they don't like semi-automatic weapons being on the streets either. So, Bob, thanks for the call. Well said. We'll be back in just a minute. Stick around. Welcome back. Stephanie in Winterville, Georgia. Hey, Stephanie, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I also really enjoyed Jay's discussion of race, and it just made me think about, I guess I wanted to be, I'm a white woman, but I wanted to just say that I'm also forced to think in terms of sex, in terms of my safety every day, and in terms of sexual harassment at workplaces, which I've had happen to me. I'm also a survivor of sexual assault by a man, and I am also a person who takes SSRIs to treat clinical depression. So I wanted to push back on that a little bit with you. I don't know if you have ever experienced major depressive disorder in your life, but I have, and part of it has to do with being female and in this world. And I worked with a psychologist in talk therapy for 3 years before I ever tried antidepressants. And I was, that whole time, I don't agree with you that they're addictive. When I go off them, and I do sometimes, my depression, it just comes back. So basically, pretty much all day, and again, I have been diagnosed with major depressive disorder, it's just, you're constantly suicidal. It's impossible for me to hold a job. Basically, what I'm saying is that they have been life-saving for me, and I think to equate people who need that with someone who perpetrates mass shootings, it's really stigmatizing. And I meditate, and I eat healthy, and ironically, like the sexual assault that happened to me actually happened when I was out taking a walk. So that might be like some of your male privilege kind of blinding you to what different people have to do to be able to survive.
Well, here's what I'm trying to say, Stephanie. We know for a fact that people on SSRIs are more likely to kill themselves and other people. There is a label on the... Stephanie, if you look at the bottle, your prescription bottle, look at the prescribing information, it has a black box on it that warns against that. So let me finish what I was saying, if you may. You probably are going to agree with me when I'm done, I hope. So number one, we know that SSRIs have this as a side effect because they diminish affect. They diminish the individual taking them's sense of connection to everything else around them. And so people feeling slightly separated from all of their feelings is a good thing if their feelings are overwhelming and negative. And so for somebody with, a major depressive disorder who responds well to SSRIs, God bless you, Stephanie. That's a wonderful thing. The problem, it's just like, it's like saying, okay, we use knives to cut our food, but people can kill people with knives. There is and if you want to make the analogy with drugs, we use opiates to kill pain after surgery, but you can also get addicted to opiates. So what I'm saying is that there is a downside to these SSRIs, or there can be a downside. There's also an upside, obviously, or they wouldn't be in the marketplace and they wouldn't be prescribed. But my personal experience with them and with having people close to me and people that I know really well using them has been broadly negative. But I have known a couple of people who had, major depressive episodes and they thought SSRIs would help them out.
Well, what would you like people to do that have major? Because it would be great if I had like a community around me.
I'm not trying to dictate anybody's anything, Stephanie. What I'm saying is that, number one, there's a I don't want to debate pharmacology with you because you have something that's working for you. You should have that available. It should be available to other people who have the kind of crisis you have.
I've never shot anyone. I'm not a mass shooter. I'm not,
Exactly.
I don't hurt anyone.
Exactly. And there's also a number of other drugs that can be used to treat depression, and there are other techniques. But as I said, I don't want to debate that with you. What I'm saying is that one of the things that we have found is that a lot of these young shooters, the school shooters, were on SSRI drugs. There's some of the older ones were on SSRI drugs. It makes sense, actually, that if somebody's taking a drug that disconnects them from their feelings, they're going to be disconnected from their negative feelings. They may be disconnected from regulatory feelings as well. Not you, necessarily, but somebody else. And that's why that label is on those drugs, that says that it increases the risk of suicide and violence. And
I just think it's important to acknowledge that most people in this country who are actually on SSRIs are actually female. And I mean, a huge part of that is, we're just trying to survive like this cultural context that, I can't walk alone at night without feeling every man I see pretty much is a potential threat to me. And I guess, you could call that overreacting or whatever, but most women I know have had either an assault as bad as mine or worse. And I feel like there's very little empathy in the mainstream culture for discussion of that. White men in particular don't seem to take it as seriously as racism. And, just trying to deal with that, it's like maybe I am numbing myself a little bit, but I don't know what the alternative is. The alternative is just like this constant crushing pain where no one cares and no one listens.
Right. I understand.
Thanks
and I'm so glad that you've been able to find something that works for you, Stephanie. And I hope it continues to. With regard to shooters, though, we as a society need to be looking at what it is that's going on in our culture. And I think that we're looking at multiple factors here. We're looking at the brutality of testosterone-driven behavior in our society. We're looking at the proliferation of weapons. We're looking at, just last year in Congress, who got money from the drug industry? Ted Cruz got $360,000. Marco Rubio got $176,000. Paul Ryan got $171,000 from the gun industry. Number 3 legislator in Congress. Number 4, Ron Johnson of Wisconsin got $165,000. Rand Paul, $155,000. Those 6 guys are the top 6 recipients of gun, all 6 figures, Ben Carson as well, of money from the gun industry. You think that they're going to call out the gun industry? I'm skeptical, shall we say. So anyhow, thanks so much for being with us. Happy Daylight Savings Time. And we will be back tomorrow. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. See you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates. helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeats.com.